This is the September 5, 2017 edition of the Board of Selectmen, the late summer, early fall, start of school edition. And we disclose at the beginning of every meeting that we're being recorded. And Rachel's back now, so we're all set. And we take a moment at the beginning of our meetings to give our appreciation to our troops that are serving around the world. So let's do that first. Thank you. Our first item on our agenda is citizen comment. Mr. Massaro, do you have any comments for us?
Not right now.
He didn't sign up ahead of time.
That's right.
Oh. Mr. Massaro is our entire audience this evening, so.
That's to stay for the whole meeting. True.
Under our action items, let's see, Director of Public Works, Maurice Goulet, requests the Selectmen vote to sign Chapter 90 reimbursement request for project chip seal various roads in the amount of $210,404,065. So is the $210,000, Mike, is that all the chip seal that we did all summer long?
I think that doesn't include Main Street. You know, that will be a different, it's a different type of ceiling, but
Right.
that will be, I think the original amount was 400,000 or something. So there will be additional amounts.
That would irritate everybody if we chip sealed 109, huh?
Well, it is some kind, it's a larger stone, it's a different type, it's more compact, so it's a
Yeah.
longer wearing service. He expects to get at least 10 years out of that, so we'll see.
So I would move that we vote to sign the Chapter reimbursement request as requested by Maurice Goulet.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Director of Facilities, Jerry McCarthy, requests the Selectmen vote to sign agreement with O'Sullivan Flooring Company, North Quincy, to perform floor sanding and refinishing at the center in the amount of $5,950.
My understanding is that work won't be done till December, but that he is, wants to get it in the works anyway, so they'll be in line to do it.
All right. I would move that we vote to sign that agreement with the Sullivan Flooring Company as requested.
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Town Council wishes to discuss Kingsbury Club Medfield amendment to lease and agreement. Request Selectmen vote to sign documents for Kingsbury Club refinance.
So the Kingsbury Club approached the town about a refi, whereby I believe in addition to refinancing, they're actually getting some more money for capital investment. And I was approached by their legal counsel on behalf of their lender. The lender's counsel had the usual submittals for the town to sign. I reviewed them, found some of the provisions to be unacceptable. We had a negotiation back and forth, and ultimately came to resolution. They struck a lot of the objectionable language or otherwise modified it, so I'm comfortable with it. The issue becomes, which I've been through with lenders before, as you know, the tenant is in there with for a very specific purpose, and for any change of purpose, or for any change of tenant for that matter, it's subject to your approval. Lenders traditionally want a position where if there's a foreclosure on the mortgage, they have all kinds of options open, and they don't want to be restricted like that. And so that engenders some conflict which needs to be resolved. But ultimately, this new lender will have no greater rights than the existing tenant as far as that goes.
And the new lender is Eastern Bank.
Yes, it's a SBA secured financing through Eastern Bank.
So Mark, are the terms of these agreements different than the terms that Kingsbury had with its original lender?
Actually, there's been several lenders. The last lender, I actually gave them, because they reached, I've been dealing with Kingsbury Club's legal counsel, and she in turn has been dealing with the lender's counsel. I gave them the documents which we had approved with the last lender, and I was informed that they had taken those and drafted them for this transaction, which they had, but then they'd thrown a bunch of stuff in, which I then had to have them extract because it went beyond what I thought was acceptable. So right now, it's essentially the same agreement that the existing lender has.
And that, I assume that means that there's nothing in the provisions of either of the contract documents that would affect Kingsbury's Club's ability to sublease land, to expand to other land or anything like that.
They've got no, in the event of a foreclosure, they have the same rights as the tenant, which is basically to run a recreational or athletic facility, and anything else is subject to the town's approval. As well as if they want to put another tenant in possession, that's subject to approval as well.
Well, no, I'm thinking particularly about the ability to what I'm getting at is if a similar project to the one that was under consideration for Lot 3 came up again, but to do it, it would be preferable for it to be subleased land. Is there anything in this agreement that changes the ability that Kingsbury had with the town's approval to sublease land?
Now, this is strictly a refinance, so this is the lender
Yeah.
protecting itself or attempting to protect itself in the event of default by the tenant.
So there's no restrictions that the lender puts on what the current tenant can do relative to the business, that, unless it's something that would jeopardize the lender's value of the land and the loan.
Yeah, the lender was trying to get more rights for itself, but they did, as far as what the existing tenant has for rights, none of that's even on the table for negotiation. The original lease is still in place.
Okay.
And I mean, I assume already that the lender would have to approve almost anything that the Kingsbury Club wanted to do. I would
Yeah.
assume that, just like if you're releasing some land from a lien, you'd have to get the mortgagee's approval.
Right.
What,
to release it.
Subsequent stuff, I'm sure they've made some kind of a proposal, Kingsbury Club, to this lender as to what it is they propose to do, and that initial approval is all part of this transaction.
And so as part of this, it's got $5 million in there for the construction of certain improvements in the leased premises. Is that back financing for the pool, or is there something additional that they're doing with that money that they haven't already done?
I think, Mike, I don't want to sandbag you, I think you know more than I do, but my understanding is that it's new capital.
Work on top of it, okay.
Yeah, the last time I talked to Mr. Janjigian, which a couple of weeks ago, he told me they were thinking of expanding, adding a number of tennis courts and pickleball courts, but within the original approved layout of the building. So they're not expanding the building beyond what the planning board or the zoning board originally approved.
Site plan, I think.
Site plan,
it's not in, the- yeah,
Actually,
it's in
there's a
the original,
special
it's not in the
permit.
current building.
Special
but they
permit.
do with
It was
the
a special permit,
special, so it'd be the zoning,
yeah.
yeah. So they're not expanding beyond what the zoning board has approved. The other thing they're planning on doing is increasing the size of the daycare facility, and for that, they're gonna use, that building that's stone-faced when you drive in, that has never really been used, it's like a large room. They're gonna use, I think, roughly 2/3 of that for a expanded daycare program. And then the other will be a separate entrance for the restaurant. They said some people don't like having to go into the health club to enter the restaurant, so they want to put a separate entrance in, and a sort of like a waiting room inside that entrance. So that the only expansion of the building will be the tennis courts and pickleball courts, I guess, which is sort of tennis for seniors, as I understand.
They haven't submitted a request to the town yet, Mike.
I haven't seen a request to the town. It was just tentative when he talked about the loan, so.
Any further questions? So because of legal work that I've done, I'm going to recuse myself on this. Can you just run the vote, please?
Yep, so I will move that we approve the amendment to the lease and the agreement concerning ground lease as submitted by town council.
And just to clarify, there's two agreements, right?
That's what he just,
I
one's
just
an
wanted to make
amendment,
sure we were clear.
one's an amendment to the lease,
Mhm.
and the other is the agreement regarding the ground lease, which is a stopple agreement,
Right.
basically.
And I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So there's 4 copies of each if you could find.
Find sometime tonight to sign them.
Okay.
We have a letter from the Council on Aging Board, Chair Robert Held, requesting that the selectmen vote to assign Richard Ryder to their board to fill a vacancy. There were also letters of interest that were received from Ann Thompson and Eve Potts. That's good that they've got a lot of interest, good.
I think in the past you said whenever there was a vacancy on a board, you ought to give some time for people to apply for it, so you probably want to leave it open,
Nothing else has come in,
nothing else, yeah.
no.
So
Well,
there's
this
three
goes back to
candidates,
June,
there's 3 candidates, and the council is recommending one of them.
yes.
Correct.
Because I think this goes back to Lou Fellini's resignation.
No,
No?
Neil DeRoss,
Neil DeRoss, okay.
yeah, I think he submitted that in May,
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's probably enough time, I would think.
oh,
for-
yeah.
I think so,
Yeah, yes, yeah.
So I would move that we appoint Mr. Ryder as requested by the Council on Aging Board.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Pending items, Selectmen Annual Calendar. And I see, Mike, that you've given us a new version of your calendar.
I did that, let me go over it with you, and there's a couple of things.
Could I just, before you start, just reiterate my request that you put a date on the top right?
Oh,
of the
I
first
forget, I'm
page so that
sorry,
we can
yes, I should do that,
Get so
so.
many copies.
And before we do that, can I ask one, this is, doesn't change the vote or anything, but in something like the Council on Aging, to your point, Mike, about word getting out, do we have a procedure for how we publicly let people know? Or is something like that up to the Council on Aging? I just want to know how we do it.
It usually gets announced here.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't know that we have any way of letting, does it get on the website?
It's usually announced here, it's on the website, and we usually tweet it out. Roberta had asked that she was publicizing it at the council.
Okay,
Um,
so it's, to Mike's point, it's gotten out there in a.
Oh, yeah.
in a
Yes.
way. And then when more people volunteer for a position, this is a broader question, because this happens a lot. When more people volunteer for a position than we actually have openings for, is there any procedure that we normally follow to let the people who didn't get selected, A, let them know they didn't get selected, and B, let them know we appreciate the volunteer, and C, anything to recommend or encourage them to stay involved, get involved, or, I know, Pete, you've always.
And when people resign, do we send everybody
Yeah.
a letter of thanking them for their service to the town?
Almost, almost,
Yeah.
okay, honest answer.
That's almost great.
We're almost there.
So it would be good if we could almost do a little more of that, I guess. And I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't know whether it's, it just seems like if we have people in town that are doing that, we ought to do it all the time.
Do we let people know if, for instance, like the Affordable Housing Trust, did an email go out to let everybody know that they've been appointed and not appointed?
No, because the two people who were, well, one, I had a conversation with the person, one of the people who was not chosen, and the other person who was not chosen was at your meeting, and I believe you explained your reasoning as to why you didn't choose them. So I think, in that case, I think, I didn't send a letter because we had had a personal conversation with them, but.
It'd be good to have sort of a protocol, just to
Sure.
have something that automatically goes out, I think, to people when,
From my perspective, as long as we haven't let anything slip through the crack. I think, okay, I did that with the ALS team because I wasn't sure if people that didn't get picked, I didn't know whether we had a procedure, and so I was tardy in having some of those conversations, but I basically had the conversations with people that express appreciation on behalf of the town, and on my behalf, so I was on the committee, but it does feel like there should be we should be sure that we do it.
Sure.
thanks for bringing that up.
Yep.
Mike, on your calendar then?
Sure, I revised this, and as you'll notice in the first couple of meetings, we're a little bit behind. It's a little tough getting things organized over the summer. But there's a couple of things in this I wanted you to take a look at and decided how you wanted to handle it. For example, you normally have 2 meetings in a month. For September, I scheduled 3, and the third one, you had said at some point in prior years that you would like to set aside one night for a single topic rather than having a bunch of items on the agenda. So for example, for the September 26th meeting, I put down items around long-term planning and invited the committees that are really dealing with that. Or
So I think that's a good idea, but could we do that in October instead?
Sure.
We did agree the last
Yeah.
time we weren't gonna meet the 26th, so I've scheduled something for the
Yeah,
26th.
and that's why this says draft, so
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you, any changes, just let me know. Just a reminder to people, the election, primary election for the state senate is on the 19th. So that's coming up fairly quickly.
So in terms of the meeting that you scheduled for us, Mike, we're gonna move that into October, and are you suggesting that we put it as a third meeting, Mike, or?
Well, I'm just saying,
One of our
because
two
based on
scheduled
previous
meetings.
discussion, I had
Right, yeah,
scheduled
you weren't gonna
something
be
for
here,
26th.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if we think that's something that requires, I mean, when I initially saw this, I was thinking that it might fit with the meeting on the 17th. It would make 2 topics, but if we dealt with sort of water and sewer specific issues up front, assuming that works for the Water and Sewer Board, I mean, it would make sense to me that they be there for the long-term planning discussion as
Yep.
well.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
I think that's a
so-
good
Then,
idea.
yeah. Okay, why don't we do that? We'll move that to the 17th, yeah. Okay. And that's also the date for the election, the final election for the state Senate vacancy, so.
And that would also, do you know, Mike, if the, I haven't talked to Mike Quinlan in a bit, do you know if the townwide master plan committee is meeting in September?
I don't think he's been able to schedule a September meeting yet, so
That'll give him
it's,
some more time to
Yeah,
schedule a meeting too.
yeah.
Can I ask a dumb question? What is the status of the townwide master plan? The last I'd heard, well before our own election, was that it was on the back burner pending the state hospital master plan, but
So, when they were here last, it was in the context of deciding whether to press forward with it at last year's annual town meeting. And the recommendation from the master planning committee was not to do it for last year's annual town meeting. I think we had discussed that it might potentially be a useful additional warrant article at the special town meeting, so that once the master plans of the hospital were adopted, they'd move right ahead. And they had laid out 3 different ways to go about developing a master plan. So the most expensive and most efficient way would be to hire a master planning consultant who would do a lot of the work. And then it was kind of variations on that. One way was do it all yourself, which I don't think any of us thought was a great idea. The other way was sort of more of a hybrid. And so we didn't really decide on the best way to do it, but I think we agreed that last year wasn't the right time. And I think we suggested that maybe if they kind of got their plan a little bit more tightly developed, that could be an add-on warrant article at a special town meeting to say, okay, we've completed this, we're now gonna move ahead with the townwide master planning process.
so they're in the planning to plan.
They're still in the planning to plan process. They've done a lot of research on other towns who've done it, how they've done it, how to organize it, and all of that. So I think, I mean, based on my last discussion with Mike, he certainly thought they'd be ready no later than this year's annual town meeting, potentially earlier than that as well.
Good.
Yeah, and the meetings I've been to, I think they interpret their mission not to prepare the master plan, but to prepare a process to undertake the master plan, because the master plan is usually a 2 or 3 year undertaking. So
Planning a plan.
it's a plan of how to plan.
So semi-tongue-in-cheek, is that consistent with the guidance that the selectmen at the time gave
That's
them when they were formed?
precisely the guidance they were given,
Okay,
to
thank you.
develop
Okay.
a master plan to be done in the most efficient process.
Okay,
Well, first to decide whether to do it or not.
yeah, okay.
Right, whether it's worth spending the money, and secondly, to develop a process so that the master planning process would be efficient, itself done on a relatively short time frame, and get the work done. I think a big part of their work and I'm saying this because I wrote the charter for what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
is identifying existing plans that were in process, and then figuring out what the gaps were,
Yep.
and then here's what it's gonna be, so you can take that master plan. The idea, my view was to do a master plan in a year. That if you take what's in, there's a lot of planning underway, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, where are the gaps, what else needs to be done? Here are the other, because there's a statutory definition of a master plan, what you need, and I think there are probably other areas where we'll wanna have a master plan, and so they're gonna kinda identify those
okay.
areas, so.
It's interesting in their survey, it seems a lot of communities are in the same situation we are, where the original master plan is very much out of date. And some communities seem to think it was a very critical phase. Other communities felt it was a waste of time. So they got a mixed bag of reactions from other communities as to the significance of it. And
Yeah, my interest has increased as I've started to detect certain issues that actually require a master planning perspective. You know, there's forks in the road.
Sidewalks, for example.
Well, that would be a good one, but there's others beyond that, that are kind of like fork in the road questions, and right now, there's nobody who's actually putting the turn signal on one way or the other. It's just that fork in the road is coming up, and either it'll become overcome by events, or,
Well, this committee is, part of its charter is to identify the master plans that we need.
Okay.
And so here's the ones we're gonna do.
And I talked to Jerry McCarty today, and he tells me over the weekend on a rainy Saturday, he's just pretty well finished up his 20-year capital plan. So he should have that for you shortly, and I think he's scheduled to come in next month, so.
start praying for more rain in order to improve the efficiency of town government.
I know, yeah, he really is a worker, so.
Bill Hatter.
Yes,
Have to
Mr.
get him-
Massaro,
Have to get him a microphone.
can you get him, yes, please.
Whenever we talk about the townwide master plan, I always talk about the state hospital master plan, getting it incorporated into the townwide master plan. The last time we talked about this, I think the board had decided that it wouldn't be a major issue, essentially just, an amendment to the town existing plan to incorporate the state hospital plan. I'm just curious as to whether there's any special process that needs in terms of like a town meeting or whatever. Does it need to be voted? If so, then we ought to think about a warrant article for that.
It's just gotta be approved by the planning board.
Okay.
Yeah, I think under the state guidelines, there's 9 areas that they want you to address, but you're not restricted to those 9.
Okay.
For example, one of the ones I suggested to them is we ought to have a financial segment to that plan, the master plan too. So, and that is not in the state guidelines. as I
But in
understand
terms
it, so.
of the legal incorporation of the hospital master plan into the townwide master plan to get the 2.5% kicker under the agreement, that's just under the state statutes approval of the planning board. It does not require a town meeting vote. And presumably, if the town meeting has adopted the master plan for the state hospital, the planning board would then vote to incorporate it. Because we do have an existing master plan, it needs to be updated, but we do have one, and so you can incorporate that, and then we'll update the master plan.
It's, you're absolutely right, but the common practice, in my experience, has been to take the master plan to the legislative body, kind of as a
Right.
show of support.
I would think, though, that if what we were doing was incorporating the hospital master plan into the 1964 master plan, having just had town meeting approval of the hospital master plan, the better process would probably be to have the planning board incorporate it so that we can get the 2.5% kicker, then bring the new master plan to the town meeting as opposed to bringing
Right.
the old one.
Right.
Because, I think under the state statute, we all agree, and it requires just planning board approval.
Right.
And so that's, to Bill's point, making sure we take advantage of that. It's just incorporation into the existing master plan, does not require us to do a new one, but then we'll do a new one afterwards, and we can bring that one to the town meeting.
And there's several departments that have sort of updated their segment of the master plan. For example, the library and the schools have done strategic plans. Now, I don't know whether that would qualify as a education and library science master plan segment, or whether it's a shorter term. I think they were 5-year goals, but I think they probably address the longer term issues, so.
So my other question about this calendar, Mike, for the folks who I mean, I think we probably ought to reach out to some of these folks if you haven't. Have you reached out to these people to see if they're available?
No, that's what I'm gonna do this week, yeah.
Especially the Water and Sewer Board, if we make sure they're locked down for the 17th.
Okay.
That would be good. And then, ALS committee for the 3rd.
Yeah, I have the ALS committee down twice, once for October 3rd, once in December. That was another issue in December. I have December 12th or 19th. I'm not sure those are the right dates, but anyway, sometimes the 19th can be quite close to the holidays, and people have a hard time meeting around that time, so.
Evelyn and we'll take a look at the dates.
We'll work it out. Yeah.
We're gonna take that and look at that tomorrow.
Okay. And then I suggested that perhaps a Saturday meeting on the budget, with the departments on budgets, rather than trying to do it on a Tuesday night when you have other items on the agenda, or you can probably go through them a lot quicker if you do
Could
them on
we
a
do that as a
Saturday.
joint with the warrant committee as well?
They could be here if you invite them, and that might be a good way to do it, yeah.
Get
yeah,
all the departments here at once.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Mike, on the budgets, the two questions. One, this has operating budgets submitted by December 8th. On your
Yeah.
plan here. I'm thinking to my warrant committee years, I don't ever recall operating budgets all being done that early. And I'm
Right,
just curious.
that has
what
been the
size
trick.
whip you're gonna use to make sure this happens this year. So my question is
Is
that a
yes,
realistic
yes.
date?
It's the date we have traditionally used, and it has, you're right, it
That's
has
not
not been.
reassuring, Mike.
Yes.
That sounds like
Well-
a question for the new chairman of the warrant committee.
Yes,
So, well, the fact that it's, you're suggesting something on January 9th, that part of me says, okay, well, whatever it is, the 9th is where the rubber meets the road with real budgets. So I just asked the question to get a sense of whether this is a nice theoretical schedule, but chances are it won't happen, or whether there's something that you guys are doing.
I
that's
think
going to
actually last year
change
the
things.
budgets did come in, the operating budgets came in
They
quite a bit faster than they had in the past. It was the warrant articles we had trouble with this past
Okay.
year.
Okay.
And so many of them came in February and March, so we were scrambling to get them done.
There's one other editorial comment I have, Mike, you may actually, well, Mike, you would, because of your recent warrant committee experience. Is there a way that we can schedule the selectmen's reviews of these departments after the warrant committee has actually reviewed the budget, and so that we hear a recommendation? What I'm sensitive to is when I was on the warrant committee, there were times when departments would come to the selectmen. The selectmen weren't really doing a budgetary review, they were doing a concept review of what the purpose was. They would say, we think this is a great idea, and then the department would go down to the warrant committee and run aground on the rocks of fiscal reality. So in the best of all worlds, it seems like the budgets would be reviewed first by the warrant committee. By the time a department comes to see us, we know that the warrant committee, has at least tentatively endorsed the budget or has tentatively got heartburn with the budget, so that we're not kind of cross-shooting each other just because of the sequencing.
All right. I disagree with that.
You want them to come to us first?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, anyway, unless we're just gonna delegate kind of our budgeting role to the departments, which is essentially historically what has been done, in the sense that the departments can go to the warrant committee essentially with budgets that haven't been approved by the selectmen, and then see what they can do with the warrant committee. Whereas, I mean, in theory at least, under the town charter, the budgets are the selectmen's budgets, right? We're the head of the executive branch of the government, and so, I mean, in theory, and maybe it's just not practical to do it, right? And that given the size of our town government, we don't need to have this sort of two-piece of it, right? But typically, the executive would propose a budget to the legislative branch. The legislative branch would review it and come back, right? The warrant committee is a representative of the legislative branch of the town government. And so, to a certain extent, I mean, I think we ought to be proposing, I would think, departments shouldn't be going to the warrant committee for budgets that we don't support, right? So I would think we ought to be setting some priorities overall for the departments first. And then really the warrant committee's biggest task is kind of taking the recommendations of sort of the town side budgets and the school side budgets and working out an overall town budget within the guidance. In the same way that the school committee and the superintendent kind of knock around their budgets and make a budget proposal that goes to the warrant committee. In the first instance, they don't go to the warrant committee without school committee support, for example. Right? The school committee says, this is the budget we're gonna support.
I would think of it the exact opposite way. So to go back with what you said, first off, I never thought of the warrant committee as simply a legislative body. I actually saw the warrant committee as an advisory body that dug into the budgets and took a hard look at the financial practicality on behalf of the town. So I saw them as an advisory body to the executive branch, as well as a representative of the legislative body being the taxpayers. The situation that I've been sensitive to, that I would like to see us not have happen, is either with what you've described, people come and make their pitch on budget and concept to the selectmen. The selectmen say yes, and then the warrant committee becomes one of two things. Either the body that comes back to the selectmen and says, no, that's the thing I don't like. I didn't like it when I was on the warrant committee because I didn't like the idea of coming back to the selectmen and saying, I don't care what you think, we can't afford it, you can't have it. That's the situation I want to avoid. Or they sit there and the departments come to them and say, we went to the selectmen approved the budget, so figure it out. And then the warrant committee's job mostly becomes one of just kind of figuring out what the size of the operating overrides will be for whatever, either that or else the selectmen are gonna start, I'm gonna have to get my big spreadsheet out again, and we actually are truly gonna dig into the budget in a way that lets us make those proper decisions from a fiscal standpoint. I would rather see the warrant committee be the one that comes in with a somewhat hard-nosed financial view that sits there and checks out every corner of the room to figure out a way to not have to spend money, perhaps is too hard-nosed with certain departments, and give the departments the opportunity to come to the selectmen and say, the warrant committee is not currently supporting our budget. Here's why we wanted the budget we wanted. This is why we think these things are important. And so we become not an appeal board, but basically we become a second body where if a concept that a department really thinks is important, they can come and make that case to us, and we can either take on the job of saying, look, we're gonna carry this back down to the warrant committee and see if we can't push to find a way to do it. That to me works better than having us be the ones making the budget decision and then just throwing it at the warrant committee.
Well, not necessarily the budget decision, right, but you've kind of pushed us into, with, for example, with the town goals, right? We have a set of town goals, right? And so if we're gonna operate according to a sort of a set of goals, I agree with you, right? We put a lot of time into it, I think we've gotta keep working on it, and you're gonna identify short-term goals and long-term goals. I mean, the budget ultimately is an expression of how the selectmen think they ought to achieve their goals. It's ultimately, there's our ultimate statement of policy of here are the things that we think are priorities for the town. And collectively, here's how it works. Like, I think it should be the selectmen who are deciding in any given year with X amount of dollars to spend over and above what we need to kind of operate the government or what have you. Here's how we're prioritizing them. And so we, as the executive branch, are saying to the departments, this is where we think we need investment this year, this is where we think we need to spend money, so we're gonna propose a 4.5% increase in that department, and as a result, all these other departments are gonna only have 1% increase. And this is the sort of executive branch budget to achieve the goals that we've identified. The warrant committee then has to scrutinize it, kick the tires, do all the work that it does, make the recommendations that it's gonna make to town meeting. If we disagree with the warrant committee, then, we can go and make the case to town meeting like anyone else could, and say the warrant committee's wrong, and the town meeting ought to adopt our proposal for it, just like we would on any warrant article where the warrant committee disagrees with us. And so, from my end of the warrant committee side, I always thought there was a little bit of a, I observed the same thing you did, where sort of the selectmen would approve something, come to the warrant committee, and the warrant committee would have to figure out the math on your spreadsheet, how we did all this stuff. But you never got a sense collectively from the selectmen saying, here's where our real priorities are, right? It was almost, the departments were coming with their proposals, and there was no sense in any given year, okay, of these 6 things, if the warrant committee's view is, look, given the school budget, given this, given that, we could only have 3 of them. We never really got a sense from the selectmen, okay, here are the 3 things that the selectmen want. Then it really becomes the warrant committee's view of which of those 6 things are the most important that would prevail. Because there wouldn't be, and I don't, and from a sequencing standpoint, you may be right, But I think if we're gonna try to, as the Board of Selectmen, identify town goals, achieve those goals, kind of have kind of a longer-term policy, then we have to make sure the budgets that are going to the warrant committee aren't a waste of their time, right? So that we don't wanna have it come back to us and say, well, we don't think this is very important, so yeah, we'll just knock that off. Or have something go through the warrant committee really likes, and we look at it at the end and say, well, gee, here's something that we thought was important for this year that just didn't get funded, when we would have taken that over these other three things if we knew that was what was on the table.
So, from my standpoint, the point of the selectmen being able to establish and upfront lay out priorities and expect that the warrant committee, the departments would be mindful of those priorities. I totally agree with you on that. Part that I fall down on is I can't envision us being smart enough to make a determination that the library needs a 4.5% increase this year, and therefore the Council on Aging and the Department of Health will only get 1%. Not because we couldn't make the priority that this is the year to push the library, but that we wouldn't have the ability to make that specific quantitative determination and make that trade-off. Tonight, we just approved 2 big contracts on a lease. Well, we rely on Mark to say, hey, I've gone through this thing, I've looked at the details, I pulled some things back. We're not actually going down into the details of the lease and saying, well, Mark, but on page 35, I think this needs to be there. So my issue isn't the idea of the selectmen establishing priorities, ideally priorities that, you know, are consistent with a set of town goals that everybody understands. My issue has to do with kind of in that detailed level of making a 4.5% increase here. I don't think we're good enough to do that, and I don't really think it's our job when we have a good warrant committee to do that. But they're an advisory committee. They're not making the decisions, they're making advice, but they're digging into the practicality of it so that it's like they should be reflecting things we think are important and be mindful of those, but they should be advising us on, I know you want this, but here's what it's gonna take, and we think you have to do this and this and this to trade off in order to get that. Do you still want it? That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. I guess I never thought of the warrant committee as an advisory body to the selectmen. It was sort of more of a check on the selectmen and a check on the executive branch on behalf of the legislature of the town. I mean, that was always kind of how I understood what a finance committee did, that it was sort of an
They
independent.
must not have liked you very much when you were the chairman.
What's that? Well,
I
no.
I always thought of it as an advisory board to the town, but personally, it pained me when we did something that told the selectmen they couldn't have something that they said they wanted. And it was the way this piece, I kind of agree with you on. It pained me to do that, but that was the way the process worked. And a piece of that was because they would have said yes to, you know, the concept, and then we would have said no to the financing. And
I guess I think that if we're gonna, that we ought to have more attention to the budget than that process would imagine. 'Cause just practically speaking, then the selectmen are gonna have more of a passive role in the budgeting process. And that's fine if it's the way we wanna do it, but just realistically speaking, the budgets will go to the warrant committee. By the time the warrant committee gets down to a final set of recommendations, it's gonna be March. And so there aren't gonna be that many opportunities for the selectmen to come back and say, ooh, hold on a second now. Of all these things that were proposed, you know, I would think what we wanna do is propose to the warrant committee effectively a balanced budget, one that is consistent with the overall financial guidance that the selectmen are giving departments, and not leaving it to departments to plead their independent cases to the warrant committee to try to get the warrant committee recommendation. Rather saying, look, here is the overall budget for the town, this is the budget the selectmen support, we think the warrant committee ought to support it, and then to the extent they push back and say, no, we think it's gotta be this, we don't think that's worth spending money here, here's whatever else they're gonna do through that process. I don't know, I would think that would probably be a more efficient, if we were trying to go in with a budget that at least on the bottom line, presumptively, the warrant committee could endorse, right? So instead of having all the departments go in with an increase that might be greater or lesser, we could say, we get the guidance from the warrant committee in the beginning of November. The selectmen decide, okay, we're gonna follow that guidance, and the overall town budget is gonna be no greater than 2.5% of the town side. Here are the various things that have come in over the course of the last year, and we think that, maybe this department, we need an extra police officer, or we need an extra this, and so we've got to find a way to work that in among these other budgets, as opposed to kind of throwing it to the warrant committee to sort all of that out.
Mike, I think I think we look at it differently, but I think it's also partly because we look at the role of the warrant committee differently.
I guess. I always felt frustrated from the warrant committee side that we never got that list of priorities from the select, right? I felt we were negotiating individually with each department. Each department would come in and they'd want X or they'd want Y, and we'd never really get a sense. I mean, sort of all the budgets presumably were endorsed by the selectmen, but you'd never really get a sense, well, this is important, this is not important. It was like, then the warrant committee would sort of horse trade with the departments over whatever else it was gonna be.
Well, to the
Maybe that was wrong, we just didn't-
to the extent you're making the point that the selectmen could do more to make clearer priorities as an input to the warrant committee, you have no argument with me whatsoever on that. I am concerned about our ability to do the kind of detailed work that the warrant committee does, to be able to make intelligent decisions around budget decisions. There may be a way I mean, when you say 2.5%, I don't even know why you're saying that, other than that I sympathize with you philosophically that we should never have overrides. But that's a philosophical discussion about tax rates or tax growth. That's not an operational conclusion about the priorities and the pressures the town feels. That I said, no, I've looked at all the departments and I've decided we can do that this year. It's philosophy. The warrant committee, if it does its job, digs into really understanding. I mean, you don't have every department going in with a 5% increase. You have a few departments that come in with increases, and from year to year, I always found that they moved. One year it was the Council on Aging, another year it's the library, and there were good reasons for it. If we were to say, look, out of all those departments, there's a couple of departments that are gonna be looking for something, and we know it's gonna be a problem. And we think that the selectmen need to dig in on the budget side, and the warrant committee need to dig in, and the selectmen need to provide guidance to the warrant committee about how to think about this problem. Then, on an exception basis, I get it. Let's go straight. You said 2.5% for, town departments. It's like 2.5% for the town. And the issue we've had for years has been because the schools have always been more than that. Basically, the town departments have not been 2.5%. In fact, if we did that, we would be guaranteeing an operating override in April, I'd be willing to bet. What we've done for several years is always said, no, 1% for the town, and that's because we kind of know that the schools are going to suck up virtually all the growth. If we want to take on that fight and get out in front of it and work with the school department more actively than just the warrant committee, I think that's fine if that's the place that we want to push and set a priority. I just don't see us being able to do a credible job of the detailed analysis across all those budgets.
Yeah, see, I'm not talking about the detailed analysis, but I'm saying, the warrant committee meets for 3 months a year,
Yep.
effectively.
Yep.
And so, and obviously, all the members are involved with the town, they know what's going on with the town, but we meet twice a month at least or more.
Mhm.
We're at more meetings, we're involved in more discussions with different town department heads. And we ought to have a better sense than the warrant committee of the overall priorities of the town. We ought to have a better sense, at least, of in the same way that the school committee is looking at the schools and not leaving it to the warrant committee to decide whether we need 3 more history teachers or whether the science department should be that much higher or the music department should be that much less. When they come in with an overall budget number that reflects the overall priorities of the school committee all I'm suggesting is that I think we ought to view the budgets the same way. That if we're gonna try to have a process that is pushing policy consistent with a set of goals, so you have year over year, you have kind of a consistent approach, you're working towards the same thing. Each year, we're gonna have short-term priorities, here's how we're gonna move toward this goal or that goal, that we ought to be able to set the overall pressure. For example, we have to, as you move toward, forward to hire a full-time veteran service officer, right? That's gonna add an additional cost that's gonna have to come from somewhere, right? And it would seem to me that when we do that and we make a decision as a discipline for ourselves, okay, we're gonna hire this additional person, here's the additional cost, and this is where within our existing framework we're gonna find it. Okay, we're not gonna hire a person here, we're gonna try to cut back a little bit here, we're gonna ask somebody, so that when we do that and when we make that decision, So that over the course of the year, we're making decisions with those goals in mind and recognizing the fact that we're going to have to be accountable and put forward budgets that can incorporate the decisions we make over the course of the year, and not say, well, then now the warrant committee is gonna dig into the details, and here's the stuff we decided to do, and now they're gonna try to sort it out from a budgeting standpoint. I think it would make the warrant committee's ability to do the detail work to serve as, and again, this is just a philosophical difference in what the warrant committee does, to serve as a check on the executive branch of government, as on behalf of the legislative branch of government, and on behalf of the taxpayers of the town. If we can at least say to them, here are the budgets of the departments, here's the priorities we have for the year. And taking into account as well, those town meeting articles and those other things that cost money, and say, look, this year we've decided not to hire a person in this department because we think we have to spend $150,000 to do X. And so, because we don't want to have an override, because philosophically we're opposed to having an override for this, we found the money here, and this is our priority. They can always rejigger it in the same way the town meeting can always rejigger anything within the budgets that are presented.
So there's two scenarios. The one is in the annual operating budget scenario, that's the warrant committee reviewing the projected budget for next year. There's another scenario, which, let's take the veteran service officer. Let's say as you're describing it, I think you're saying, well, what could have happened is that in May, the selectmen could have made a policy decision that we're gonna hire a veteran service officer. And we're gonna have, because we have the established budget, right? Well, yeah, we could get it out of the management reserve, the reserve funds, but we don't wanna do that. We're going to decide to pull money out of an existing budget. It has, presumably it could be somebody not hired yet, let's not make it totally painful. But we'll decide that, no, this police officer we told you could hire, we need you to delay that. We're gonna pull this and we're gonna put it in here because this is a policy decision we've made. In finding where that money comes from, I, again, don't see us doing that. If we were to make that kind of a policy decision that said, we're gonna do this, we're gonna bite the bullet, we're gonna throw an extra whatever amount into the salary for a full-time VSO, I think we'd go to Mike and Christine and say, you can't have any more money, we're not taking it out of the reserve fund, but we need to find a place that we're gonna get, and they would come back and say, well, it looks to us like the best place. And again, it's not, they probably are smarter than us, but it's not because they're smarter than us, it's that they're closer to the ground. They know what's going on. It's that, the concern I have is when we make these kinds of decisions, you better doggone well be right there understanding what's happening on the ground. Otherwise, you're just kind of taking shots in the air. And I just don't think we are at that level of detail to be able to make those kinds of specific, we can dig in selectively. So I'm not saying, I like the priorities. I would even like doing that on an exception basis where we know there's a problem and it's going to be a painful decision. But what you're describing to me undercuts the warrant committee's role, again, because I'm looking at the warrant committee's role different. I don't think they're just a taxpayer advocate. I don't think they're, a one-trick pony that says, well, we just argue to not have taxes go up. I think they really are.
I don't think that's what they are either, but I think intentionally under the town charter, the budgets are the selectmen's budgets. Right, and so, at
Say
least
again?
under the town charter,
Yeah.
the budgets that are proposed by the departments are the Board of Selectmen's budget.
Yeah,
Okay,
of course.
that's what they
We're
are.
responsible for everything that goes on in town.
Right, well.
This is about how you go about doing the job.
Right, but what you're suggesting is that we're not really gonna be responsible for the budgets.
Of course we are. We have to, I'm suggesting that 3 selectmen can't do a competent job at the detail level that's required for a budget. That's a $62 million budget for the entire town.
But we only have to,
I can-
have to do an $11 million budget. That's all we have.
Same issue.
Yeah, my point holds, but, yeah. I mean, in the same way that I'm saying I view the warrant committee as having a different role, I guess maybe there's another side of that. When I was on the warrant committee, I felt like I was responsible and accountable to the selectmen. That's why I hated having to do, the warrant committee is a different name for a finance committee. It's not a taxpayer advocate committee, it's a finance committee.
Right, but it's supposed to
Except-
be independent of the executive branch of
Yeah,
government.
independent
It's not-
advisory,
It's
but
not appointed by the Board of Selectmen.
never-
It's not
well-
accountable to the Board of Selectmen.
It's
supposed
an
to be
adjunct, it's an
independent.
adjunct of town meeting, that's why the moderator appoints the members.
So is it an advocate for taxpayers, Mark? Is that the scope?
It's part of a checks and balances.
I understand.
As
It's an
was
independent
was
advisor.
indicated, under the charter, the Board of Selectmen, assisted by the town administrator, comes up with a budget, submits it. I think I just saw it at least 90 days before annual town meeting, submits it to the warrant committee for their review. So it's a second set of eyes for the budget that the Board of Selectmen's proposing.
And is
Is
that
the
how
way
we
it's
want-
supposed to work.
Is that how we want this town to operate? It's completely, nothing that you said is against the way I've seen us operate, but I've seen this town operate in a far more collaborative and detailed way to try to figure out the best path forward, not just simply a second set of eyes that reviews a budget that gets submitted. I mean, then we don't need a warrant committee to start showing up until the town meeting is in April, 90 days before April, they can start end of January. I just don't see that.
So historically, the selectmen haven't really been involved in the budgets much at all. People come and present, we get the budgets the night that they come, and so that we don't have a chance to really review stuff ahead of time. And so that, I guess I sort of line up with Gus in terms of the fact that we don't have perhaps the time to do the in-depth analysis of the budgets. I've been thinking for years that the selectmen haven't been really doing as much as we should be, because we are responsible for the budgets. But the reality is that the way that it gets structured is that we don't do much with them. People come and present, and we hear it, and then most of the time, we don't even vote on the budgets. And we give no guidance to the warrant committee at all in the past. I mean, I've seen and so that was part of my goal with trying to have an annual calendar, which was to move the budget planning process up and put it down in stone in some ways, so that we can hit mile markers that make the process move forward better for everyone. I've seen other towns that have actually, Mike, the town administrator presents the budget and starts the whole budget process. I mean, you're the one that really knows the numbers. To me, that's probably a really good thing for a town to be doing, to have the town
That's
administrator.
effectively what we do already, right? I mean,
Well, I come out with the budget guidelines and percentage increases and that. I think part of the problem, and I've seen it change over the years, and I think the biggest change was when Proposition 2.5 was voted in, and there seemed to be a shift of budgetary responsibility away from the selectmen, more towards the warrant committee. And I think it was because there was a new perspective in terms of staying within that 2.5%. So it tended to, and not just Medfield, from what I've seen, it's all over the state, it tends to defer more to the budget, finance warrant committee, whatever you call them. There are a couple of problems. One is that it's a movable target. We don't know. I've prepared a preliminary tax levy estimate for you tonight, and I've got in it over and over again. These figures are not, reliable, they're too soon, but we don't, and some of the figures we won't even have till after town meeting, so they're guesstimates. And I can guess at them because I've had a lot of experience, and I know for example, on state aid, the governor comes in with a budget, the House usually comes in higher, and the Senate comes in higher than the House, and then they tend to get together and come out with something in between. So you can kind of guesstimate on that, and usually you're wrong on everything, but the mistakes cancel each other out, and you look like you know what you're doing. But it is a tough thing. And the other thing, there is, one of the things I would recommend that you might want to consider reinstituting is the selectmen and the warrant committee and the personnel board used to get together early in the season and try to decide where are we going. Now, it's a little more difficult with collective bargaining because a lot of times the bargaining is in process and you don't have figures there either. But I think if you can sit down with the personnel board in terms of reclassification of positions, general salary increase numbers, and get a sense of that, and then, maybe meet more frequently with them, have them come in on a regular basis and say, this is where we are, where are you? So
Well,
that
you have one here September 19th to meet with the school committee and the warrant committee on budget guidelines. We can talk about our 5-year budget projections at that meeting, and
Yeah, yeah.
because I don't think there's that much daylight between us and how this would actually operate. I'm just saying that I think we ought to, to the extent there are going to be trade-offs, sort of policy-related trade-offs in the budgets, we ought to be the ones saying that
Yeah.
these are the trade-offs. The departments can still plead their cases, and it's a free country. But to the extent that we have a pool, we base our meeting with the school committee and the warrant committee, we understand where the school committee's coming from. If philosophically, based on everything we know that the town needs, we don't think that there's a need for an override. It's sort of the first decision you have to make, right? Do we think, based on everything the town needs now, is there a need for an override, right? And then if the answer is no, then you have a pretty easy, not an easy job, but you know what the job is. The job is to come up with a budget that doesn't require an override. That's why I put in my comment on the town goals, we can't control the school committee. School committee thinks they need an override, they should be able to go get it, make the case for an override. We can't be in a position of saying, it can't always be the case that we're just gonna try to accommodate that process, right? I mean, at some point, if we need to fund something, we need to fund it. And then we decide, okay, we have an extra $350,000, based on our goals, here's where we think we can spend it. This department, we've been hearing for a couple of years, wants an extra person for that, or we think we need to do a sidewalk here, or whatever it is, we think the priorities, we say, okay, and then the rest of the departments, you have to come in essentially with a level budget plus whatever, salary and benefit increase you have to retain the people that you have.
So here's what I like about what you said. The idea that the
Thank you for starting
selectmen-
with that part.
That's right. Yeah, this is a good discipline for me. The
Probably shorter.
idea that the selectmen could become more clear, more thoughtful, more strategic in assessing all of the issues that affect the town and making the optimum trade-offs they're capable of making to set a clear direction for the town that everyone else can understand and at least understand if they don't support. That, I'm absolutely, anything we want to do to get better at that, I'm all for it. Mark, to your point about the warrant committee legally being, an independent board, yes, it is. But when taxpayers come to a town meeting, and I'm speaking as a taxpayer, as a former warrant committee member, and I think looking out, from whether you're sitting up front or you're sitting in the back, and they're confronted with votes on however 42 votes or however many votes there are, many of which, most of which involve significant expenditures of money, all of which are complex. And probably almost all of the people in the room, if we're lucky, have taken the time to read the warrant article itself somewhere within 2 weeks before the town meeting, and that is mostly the depth of their understanding. When the warrant committee and the selectmen are sitting up in front of the room, and they basically are saying, look, we are recommending to you, the taxpayer, we both are recommending to you, the taxpayers, that you do this. And there's usually some explanatory comments about why. As a taxpayer, taxpayers rely on that. If they trust the selectmen and the warrant committee, taxpayers rely on that a lot, most of the time, except for maybe a couple of hot button issues, to figure out which way to vote. If the warrant committee is so independent and unlinked from the selectmen, that the selectmen have a budget, and then the warrant committee is merely an independent voice that reviews the budget and then passes judgment on it, what we have up in the front of the room are two uncoordinated groups, or less coordinated groups, that haven't really put the kind of time and effort in that I think I've seen the selectmen and the warrant committee in the I don't know, 8 years or so that I've been actually observing this. We have two groups that have not put the kind of time and effort into trying to figure out how they're both looking at it and reconcile. Now, that doesn't mean that that the warrant committee rolls over and plays dead. We've had times when we've disagreed with the selectmen. Even in fact, in this last case, selectmen voted one way, the warrant committee voted another, and that was actually as a result of a discussion, trying to make sure that taxpayers had the best picture possible. So the thing I don't wanna see us kill is that collaborative sense of, maybe it's not obligation, maybe it's just intent, to sit there and try, if the two groups of us can't figure out the best path forward, how do we expect a bunch of people in the room to actually do that?
Right.
So that's my point.
Well, I'm not trying to kill that at all. I mean, and I will say, just from my perspective as a taxpayer, I always felt better about that, knowing that it wasn't 12 people who came up with a plan. It was various different people who came up with plans that were then vetted through
Yeah.
a quasi-independent group, right? That
Yeah.
when you're putting forward a building, the people who designed the building aren't the only ones out there looking at it, right? And so I always, and certainly when I was on the warrant committee, I sort of viewed myself as, we are, and I would say, I would view the second set of eyes as the higher level in an advisory board, right? That we are there to scrutinize the proposals that come to town meeting, to put in the time that the attendees at town meeting can't put in, to scrutinize all the various ideas that the combination of other boards, other committees, other town employees are making. So that at least you've had it, maybe this is just my training as a lawyer and confidence in the adversary process, that at least it's not just the group of insiders at town hall who've all gotten together, and this is what they're coming up with together. It's, various people, and then you could go through the ringer of the warrant committee who have to ask hard questions, who haven't been there from the beginning, who don't really have necessarily a vested interest in the proposal, because they're not the proponents of it. I always felt from the standpoint of a taxpayer, and that, okay, that process means that you're getting that level of scrutiny before town meeting, right? That it's not a committee of 12 saying do this, it's various proponents, kind of, you go through the ringer of the warrant committee, and then it's come out, okay, if the warrant committee's saying, wow, 9-0, that means something, because they've looked hard at it.
So I have a question for you. First off, I agree with what you said. I always looked, when I was on the warrant committee, as I'm looking at this as a taxpayer, but as an informed taxpayer, so that if a need of the town comes up, that I actually look at it as objectively as I can. And it's like, yeah, I as a taxpayer, I don't want to have to pay for this. But, schools, I don't have to pay for this, but, yeah, this is a prudent expenditure, and so we should do it. That's kind of the view I've always brought, I did bring as a warrant committee member. But let me ask you a question. How is that view different than what you're bringing to the table as a selectman?
What do you mean?
Are we not both representing the taxpayers and trying to understand
sure.
the needs of the
Oh,
town?
absolutely.
So my point is, we're bringing that same perspective. We operate we operate year-round, we are operating on a much broader set of issues. I would hope that we do have a broader sense of everything that's going on in town. I think the warrant committee has a deeper sense of everything that's going on in a town budget, in any given operating year. But to me, I look at it as these two groups, they are independent, the warrant committee's independent, and the selectmen run the show, I guess. If these two groups with similar perspectives and desires in terms of finding the best trade-off between representing the taxpayer and providing for the town, they should work to try to get to a collaborative agreement, or they should get to the point that totally says, we disagree, but here's why we disagree, and we're gonna lay that out. So that's, in terms of the goals, that's what I see. If we're in sync on that, then the only issue I have is a process. And the only point I'm making around budgets is that the kind of in-depth analysis and familiarity you need to have with an annual operating budget being submitted as part of the town meeting process requires time and effort that goes beyond what I think we can reasonably put into it across the board, but not necessarily what we could put into it on exceptional budgets where we know we have a crunch point, or we know there's a difficult trade-off in priorities that's gonna be painful, and we have to kind of help figure out where the best place to impose the pain is.
I think we're in agreement entirely. And I think the only thing I would say then is, I think what that means from a process standpoint is that the selectmen's budget proposal is going to be the budget proposal put forward by the departments with Mike's, overall supervision. And then we're only gonna get involved at any level beyond that if there's a need coming back from the warrant committee for us to get involved. Otherwise, we'll let the departments and the warrant committee sort it out. And if we don't like it, we've kind of,
Okay.
my concern is sort of the abdication of that. I certainly last
Yeah,
year read
okay.
all the budgets, right?
Yep.
I read all the budgets, I read through them as we got them. I didn't have a problem with any of them. So as I read through them, I said, well, there's really nothing for me to do here, because these are all fine. Like I could get behind them, they were pretty vanilla. And, whatever minor, jiggering had to be done as the process went along with the warrant committee, I didn't think we needed to be involved. But I do think it would, and I always felt this as a warrant committee member, that you put a lot on the warrant committee that maybe would be better decided by the selectmen if the warrant committee came back and said, look, here's where we are, okay? We got 6 things, we gotta cut 3, all right, they total up. All right, we gotta cut $175,000 from the town budget. All right, I would think from a policy standpoint, given our role, we'd be in a better position to decide. They could say, look, this is what we figured out, you decide. That's all.
And if there's something we can tell them up front that says, look, here's the things that we really think we want to try to push, that would be useful input to them before they ever even start. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not sure how far apart we were, but I think we've come together.
This is why the short agenda meetings, Mike, always turn out to be a lot longer than.
No way you're getting a third meeting a month.
I think what Mike was alluding to before actually has some great relevance, which is Prop 2.5, because it kind of superseded FinCom's before. Because, before then you had the Board of Selectmen with all their departments and agencies which were under them, and they could go off on a toot if you would, and there was nobody to stop them other than the town meeting, which didn't know any better. But then Prop 2.5 comes in and puts a lid on the whole thing. So now you've got to play in a much closer area and keep it within that framework.
Right. Or have a doggone good explanation
Right.
for why you're gonna go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as a process solution to what we were talking about, it strikes me that what would make sense maybe is to build into our schedule more meetings with the warrant committee. 'Cause we don't really have a lot of meetings with them. They come to
Or-
see us
yeah,
occasionally
or-
when there's a joint issue.
Or sort of restructure what is now kind of the annual warrant hearing. I mean, that would be, I think, the logical place for the warrant committee to identify further cuts that need to be made on the town side budget of the school, to come back and say, we're here anyway. This is the hearing, you have public input, but, from a budget standpoint, based on our review to date, here's what we think you guys need to figure out. And then kind of, at least in the first instance, maybe we won't do it. We're gonna punt it back to them, because it's easier to let, them decide it. We'll say, okay, you know what, this is where we're gonna pull back, and that's where we're gonna, and rather than have it be just sort of the warrant committee solely in kind of the bad guy, black hat role.
Well, let me try this, because you're asked the right question, Pete. So what did we actually conclude about the process? This started when I said I thought that the selectmen shouldn't pass judgment on the budget before the warrant committee has. I'd rather see the warrant committee pass judgment and tell us the budget looks reasonable before we go and endorse a plan. And Mike, your starting position was the process should be the kind of the exact opposite. It's the selectmen's budget. Is there a way that the selectmen can see the budget? I mean, the budgets are gonna be ready between the 8th and the 9th of January. Is there a way for the selectmen to review the budgets that are initially submitted for purposes of seeing if there's any glaring problems with any of this? So probably you'd need to know what the budget growth is in every department. So how much is everything gone? Probably we would need to have an outlook for the schools. We don't control the schools, I get that, but it's the context that we have to understand. We're gonna have capital budget plans that are, at least we know what the demand looks like going in. We have the context there. We then would be in a position to do a first cut at all those budgets so that if there's any glaring problems, somebody's gone 30% up or something like that, either we know why and we are saying, yes, you gotta figure out how to make that work, or we say, no, don't even go into the warrant committee. And then have the warrant committee come back having done all the details so that we get a confirmation that the budgets are adequate or acceptable from the warrant committee based on looking at all the details. But we take that first pass to see if there are any policy level things that would cause us to want to change those budgets. Would that kind of get at what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know
That-
if, Mike, if you think that would make it more efficient overall, or what? I mean,
I think so. There are different approaches to take towards budget. They've been tried over in recent years. One of them is, traditionally what we've done is incremental budget. Everybody comes in with a 2% increase or 3% increase. Some communities have tried what they call zero-based budgeting, where the idea is that you try to measure output instead of input. I don't think that's been particularly successful. So I think what you really need to do is try to get the budgets in earlier, try to get the capital budget in early. Now, the school budget by law is not due until January 31st. So you're not going to have a final figure on that, which
I'm
is,
just looking for a projection. Based on history, the projection will probably
Yeah.
be higher than it might ultimately.
although it
turn out to
tends
be.
in January to move downward somewhat from the original, that's where the warrant committee and the school committee bang heads and get the figure down. But, yeah, I think the important part is what Pete's been talking about, is trying to get things moving along at a quicker pace so you know where you stand.
Mhm.
The problem, I think, has been, everything has been coming in so late that by the time you know where you stand, it's almost too late to change it. And that's why I put together a draft list of articles that I've been working on. I'd like you to take a look at that. Anything that you think belongs on there that isn't included, let me know. Anything that's on there that you shouldn't be on there, let me know. Take a look at the tax rate estimate, and there are some assumptions I've made in there that I tried to list what the assumptions are based on. And if you have any questions on those, let me know. But the one thing that may be interesting this year, and I don't know if they finally decided, the warrant committee is talking about possibly meeting on a different night and in a different building. So it might make it a little tougher for you guys to meet with them, so you're gonna have to schedule it, I think they're talking about meeting in the public safety meeting room there on Thursday nights instead of
Mondays.
Monday nights. Monday, okay. So, but what they could do is designate someone from the committee to meet, if there's an issue, to come to selectmen's on Tuesday, whether.
But it will avoid the problem where our meetings would necessarily overlap, right? Whereas
Yes,
historically, if it's
Right.
always the same night at the same time, we would be.
and they can't come,
hard
yes,
for us
right,
to go to their meeting. either.
yeah.
All right.
But, yeah, I think if you can start making decisions quickly, I think getting together with the personnel board, the warrant committee early on would be a help. Getting the capital budget committee going a bit earlier, now that Jerry is here, I think would be
We'll be working off that this year, so.
good. Okay, great. So, and those kind of things I think would help. And I wouldn't expect it not to be chaotic at the end. It's just the way the process works, that there's all kinds of last-minute decisions that come into play, and state aid figures start to come out, other things change, local receipts aren't what you expect, and you gotta make do. So, but I think the cooperation between the selectmen and the warrant committee, particularly the past few years, have been exemplary. I think it's been remarkable when you hear what goes on in other towns where they're practically in court with each other. And you guys can, argue and then go out for refreshments after, so I don't think it's I think it works well overall. As chaotic as it seems at times, I think it works pretty well. And
That's the
think,
part I didn't want to lose, was to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah, me neither.
So Mike, on the annual calendar, when we don't get to things, can you just move them down to the next meeting then? Or wherever you
Yes,
think they
sure,
belong? Like,
yes.
housing production plan is on tonight, and I guess we're not gonna be doing that, and
Yep.
meeting with Affordable Housing Trust Commissioners, so.
Yeah, and there's a lot of this because, people have a difficulty making meetings, they have commitments, and so.
Meet with at least one Affordable Housing Trust Commissioner tonight if you want.
We'll get a report. Good, good.
Yes,
Excellent.
right,
Maybe
we
that's
can
what the
update
third
them.
meeting- Maybe that's what the
Well-
third meeting of the month is, it's the trough of everything that
Yeah.
falls off the table
Well,
in
I
the
thought,
earlier meeting.
what have you guys had, 2 meetings so far?
We've had 2 meetings, yeah, and I'll update during my selectmen's report
Okay.
what we're having tonight.
Well, There are a couple of other things, let's see, in terms of the deadlines for getting things in. November 7th that's about the usual date for the budget hearing.
Perhaps you should have that earlier, maybe the second meeting.
Well,
in October.
except Joy's has to get the school report out, and then she has to get, who else wants a report out from Joy is under pressure.
I mean, I think the current calendar, because one of the things that I always found difficult, as when I was in the warrant committee, is we're supposed to give the budget guidance at the beginning of the process. And you'd never have any input before that from, we'd usually have one warrant committee meeting to say, what do we think our guidance should be? We'd have a meeting, we'd say, oh, no override this year, okay, it's 7:05, let's go, Whereas I think if we have this meeting now on the 19th, at least at that meeting, it would be a built-in opportunity for the selectmen to say, just so you know, we're coming forward with this year. We've decided we're gonna go ahead with this particular, whatever it is, right? We don't have one this year, but and the school committee can come and say, look, we're looking at this preliminarily, this is gonna be a big increase this year. That's where we're coming. So, because last year, the worst situation would be, I think, to be making sort of an override determination right at the end, right? Where you're trying to avoid it, now you're gonna do it, or you're not gonna do it, or you feel like you can't, you know what I mean? One way or the other, it's a big enough issue, you ought to have some forethought, and people know it's coming down the road, and people, can have input. If they're really concerned about it, they can come to warrant committee meetings, they can come to school committee, they know, okay, this is gonna be on the table this year. So I think having a September meeting with the warrant committee gives the warrant committee a chance to meet in between and kind of decide on their guidance and then come back on this. I think it's not a bad setup.
Although, I remember last year, we started out the budget process with the prospect of $1 million override, and we ended up, because of various debates and discussions, not needing an override. So, it was a lot of progress made last year, and Martha Festa kept on that budget like a hawk. And we ended up not needing an override. So sometimes I think if you come out with a projection of an override, it gives you, early enough, it gives you time to deal with it. So,
So Mike, if you can just update the
Sure.
calendar and email it out to us so that we have it. then.
okay, good, yeah. And if there's anything you don't want to do that's in there, let me know. If there's, like the Saturday meetings, for example, if there's anything you feel I've left out and you want to include, let me know.
Yeah, and if there are any things that you've mentioned, like the meeting with the personnel board that you haven't put in here,
Okay,
try
yeah.
to try to fit those in too then.
Okay. I also prepared the budget draft, or preliminary budget for you, and draft warrant articles. And that has the, most of the background. It doesn't have everything, but, and right now it doesn't look too bad, because we don't have any special warrant articles in there. So when those start coming in, that can change the perspective quite rapidly, so.
But we have a deadline for those, Mike.
Yes, we do.
Set a deadline for those.
Yes, yeah.
Those deadlines will be adhered to, no question.
I'm gonna start working on mine as soon as you can.
Yeah, whatever you have, you gotta get it in. You gotta
Unless it's
have
an
it in.
article that the selectmen really, really like.
That's fine.
Yes, yes.
Then you can get in, right.
Or it's really critical for the future of the town.
All that
Okay.
on the annual calendar, all right.
Let's see, Medfield State Hospital Planning Committee guidance. This is, I guess, got your suggestion.
So when we had at our last meeting, I had drafted the guidance in its earlier forms. Mike picked up, made the comment that it would be good to, I think you used the term guardrails, that if, the idea was, I think what we were striving for was that if the master planning committee could come up with the outputs that we're calling out here, which is this master plan concept document that would help taxpayers understand what's really being proposed for the state hospital property. If they could do that within certain prescribed parameters that the selectmen laid out, presumably, if they did all that successfully, we would expect that the selectmen would be in support of the document that they came up with. So that was where we were trying to get to, was the special town meeting where, when the master planning committee puts forth their recommendation, they're going into that committee with the endorsement of the selectmen effectively beforehand by complying with the guidance. So I think where we took the original draft that I had was adding the things that you put in, Mike, and we're at the point today, and then Pete, you provided some feedback today. I think we're at the point where maybe what we should do is just react to what's in here and have a general discussion, because I don't think we're quite ready to issue this to the Master Planning Committee because of what those inputs were. But I also don't think that we seem to have a disagreement about the overall message and purpose and focus of it. So it's got more to do with almost the mechanics of the document and what will or won't be useful than it does with the overall purpose of the document. That would be my assessment of what I've seen from your two feedback from the two of you.
And to be clear, I didn't put any guardrails in my comments. So, I mean, these are sort of my points on what I think should be in the master plan design.
Right.
You know, I didn't think from our discussion that we'd sort of come up with any guardrails, and I didn't either, right? The only thing I had expressed in the last meeting was not, you know, not using taxpayer funds on the property up front. So I don't have any, and it was mostly, I think, I wanted us to think about those in the hope that we could provide. If we don't actually have them, then it's just gonna, and it can be okay. We may have to just see the plan and then say, you know, react to it. But I'm just hoping to make it a little easier up front for the committee. So the bullet points I put in were just a little more specifics around what I think ought to be in the design plan, what the questions they ought to make sure they answer. Most of it they're probably already planning to do anyway, but it's mostly just to say, here, you know, think about this stuff, and then if there are guardrails, we can give them. If there are kind of things that, you know, lines we won't cross or things we would never support, that's the kind of stuff I think we've got to give them up front so that they can, you know, maybe consider it, maybe say they should support and try to persuade us, but at least it's not going to be a surprise if there's some particular thing that we're going to say to them, look, we were never going to support that, you shouldn't have put it in, or you should have come with a different approach. That was my thought of the guardrails.
So my general reaction was that I wasn't sure that we needed to do this at all. I thought that they've been operating pretty well, and they have a pretty good sense of what is needed to get done and accomplished. But I'm sort of willing to sign on to the idea of giving them some sort of sense of, well, it's just, I guess, reiterating what I think they already understand in terms of where they should be in a couple of months, or what they need to do for the town. So that was just, and that's as a result of that. My thinking was more deletion of things that really just weren't necessary in my mind to go to them. There's that initial document that really was not a Board of Selectmen document. They adopted a statement of their own mission. It wasn't one that was issued to them by the Board of Selectmen, I don't think.
Bill, can you clarify that?
I thought they were looking for something that's like an issue.
Yeah.
I'll bring it up.
Chris and I looked for it, and we haven't found it.
I couldn't find the draft that the selectmen prepared, and I had an email from Bill stating this is the, you know, memo that we approved at the State Hospital Committee last night, and it was being sent to the selectmen, so I
And
couldn't.
they adopted it.
Yeah, I couldn't find the paper trail where it went from the selectmen to
I didn't either.
the State Hospital Committee, but I'll keep looking.
But that's, you know, it's not that far off from what I think what the selectmen would give them, but it's not a selectmen document.
I'll go through my notes.
See what you have, unless there was a verbal discussion at the meeting where we kind of sent them along with some verbal guidance and asked them to prepare it, but I didn't have an official document that I most likely would have prepared up with the Board of Selectmen. I did not
There
have
were
it.
those two drafts that I shared with you.
Right. That's
So
all I
we're
had.
different, but
Then I have an even more important question. not for the committee, but for this board of selectmen now, I guess, and Pete, I guess you're on the spot, because you're the only one of the three selectmen that would have been there. What guidance did the selectmen give this committee 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago?
That's what, in terms of express guidance, that's what I went back looking for. And I found a couple drafts of documents,
Yeah.
but not a final document that went through them.
I thought there was a mission statement, but I'll go look. I'll see if I can find anything.
I would find that more disturbing, that we bought a $3.1 million piece of property with a $15 million liability attached to it in terms of
I think it was.
buildings, and there was no guidance to this. It helps me understand why we're going on 3 years of master planning, but it also helps me understand why, when I've asked questions, the committee about what exactly is it you've been asked to do, people kind of look at each other and say, we're not exactly sure. And
I mean, there is a charter.
Yeah, the charters.
Where is the charter?
Oh, I can pull out the charter, but the charter, yeah, but the charter is different than the guidance document that was presented. Not different, but
The charter's a paragraph.
yes, it was just, yeah.
Right, and I assume the charter was adopted by the
Let's see if
select.
I can
All
find
right,
it.
well, then let me drop back 10 yards. So first off, what I hear in your point, Pete, is that this reference to a December 2014 guidance document is a fictitious, not a fictitious, but not actually an authentic document that this committee has ever gotten. Is that fair?
Board of Selectmen did not send that, I think.
Exactly.
The State Hospital Committee adopted that as their goal.
Is it reason, so the short answer is, so this state hospital committee has not even truly had that guidance to guide them in what they've been doing. Are we in a position to at
Well,
least
they-
now?
I mean, they've used that guidance, I mean, they've
And are
got
we in
that
a
up on the
position as
board.
selectmen to endorse that that's the right guidance we want to use?
It's not a bad guidance.
Are we talking about this, are we really talking about two different documents though?
There was a set of objectives that the committee has had. It's actually even on a blown-up chart.
Yeah, in the
Dated
room.
December 2014, that were the objectives this committee had for master planning for this property. That has been represented to me as the guidance that came from the selectmen. It seemed reasonable. It does look like reasonable guidance to me. And which is why when I drafted this, I referred to it, because that's the only guidance that I was aware of the committee has gotten. Now, I think what we're saying is, well, actually, they didn't get that either, which floors me. But that's,
Well, they got general guidance in terms of,
in what form?
I don't remember the form at this point, Gil,
Okay.
Gus, but it was, they certainly were here, and we talked with them about it, but that particular document that you're citing to is not from the selectmen.
So that might need to be reworded, not to say it came from the selectmen, but it would help me to know that in fact that was good guidance for them, or it seemed reasonable to me. Pete, I think you said it looks reasonable to
Oh,
you.
Yeah,
So can we at least, going forward from today, assure the committee that this guidance that they came from somewhere, whether they developed it themselves and it was reasonable, that that's the right guidance for them to be working against? Are we at least that far?
I think it's a good set of goals for them to be working
Okay.
on. Yep.
Okay. So no harm done, no harm, no foul. They got the guidance, they thought they were working against guidance from the selectmen. Maybe it wasn't until today that you were, but now the committee's working from that guidance from the selectmen or endorsed by the
My
selectmen.
recollection is that there was a charter or a mission statement, and from that they developed
I would-
what,
So I would love to see anything besides that December 2000.
I'm working on it.
Okay, I would love to see that. The point in this upfront part was to set a context, and my real intent was to say there's nothing in this document that's intended to redirect your committee from what it's been already asked to do. So the front part here was just context. It wasn't specific guidance, it was just to set the stage for why this document was being provided at all. If you didn't think the document should be provided, then I understand why the context didn't seem necessary. In fact, maybe none of it did. To me, the thing that was important was actually the two goals for the special town meeting. And that it sounds like we're all okay with,
Yeah,
so
I
we
thought-
have clarity around
I thought your goals were good.
it. Yeah. So, to me, the front page was helpful to put things in a context and to reassure the committee that we're not getting redirection. But they probably know that by now anyway, so I could care less whether that's in or out. If that front page goes away, then I don't think anybody's gonna get super confused about why this document will show up.
Yeah, I thought the introduction was fine, but if Pete wants to delete it, I'm fine deleting it as well. What do you say?
So if you want us to get rid of it, we can get rid of it. It's not a problem.
A lot of my concern comes from a committee that has been working for years and is very close to their ultimate product. And I don't want them to feel like they're being criticized or redirected in some sort of way that is unexpected to them. So that's where I come from. That's why I'm not sure that this is an important thing for us to be doing. But I like your goals, and just so if we want to tell them that we're on the same
So
basic page with them about
I have
that.
a rebuttal for that, I guess, Pete.
Okay.
Having attended probably 3/4 of the master planning committee meetings for the last 2 years, when I've asked, do you know what the selectmen want you to do? What they want you to produce? They want, in general, activity-wise, yeah, they know what they want to do, but in terms of what they were on the hook to produce, they didn't know. So the gap that I see isn't that they are not working hard, that they don't have the best of intentions, that they don't know they're supposed to be figuring out something good to do with the state hospital property, but at the end of the day, there was no clear definition of what the output of that effort needed to be in order for them to actually complete their task. That's what drove it. When Steve came here in June on his second meeting, the following up the prior meeting that I missed, one of his closing comments was, in the absence of specific guidance from the selectmen, we're kind of trying to do the best we can. I paraphrase, that's not exactly what he said, but basically he referred to the fact the selectmen had not provided specific guidance in certain areas. So what happened, the thing I reacted to was right after that, in the next 2 meetings they had scheduled, they immediately were going off to develop RFPs. And I'm sitting there thinking about the tight time schedule between now and January, and they're writing RFPs to develop 2 particular pieces of property, wasting significant amounts of those 2 times. So the reason I drafted this in the first place was to get them something before those 2 meetings. I said, don't waste your time on RFPs. Now, you've crossed that part out, but and I'm okay with that. As well, because the thing that was important was this top message that says this is the objective for this special town meeting. I do think, and we kept most of the thoughts around the concept document, I do think that's not an immediate, intuitively obvious document to be produced. So, Mike, to your point around if there's particular characteristics or particular things that need to be addressed in that concept document that we would ask them to do, whether it's either because it's just our best advice on what would work the best, or whether it needs to be there to address any concerns we have before we're prepared to endorse it, then I'm okay with that as well. Okay, so the upfront part, I don't have anything I'd fall on my sword over here. The thing that was important to me were those 2 objectives, to make it absolutely clear that those are the 2 things they need to do. I think we have agreement on that.
Yep.
Mike, on the bullets, reacting to the bullets you wrote and the edits that Pete made, I think, Pete, in many cases, what you did was you took out the explanations of what some of these bullets, you cut down the number of words. It wasn't getting rid of bullets. You cut down the number of words.
Right.
I don't care one way or the other. Mike, I do have a few comments about some of your bullets, and they all have to do with feasibility. And this is thinking of a master planning committee that has less than 6 months before a special town meeting, and having some sense both of the complexity of the plan that they need to document or describe, and also having gone to the first of the finance subcommittee meetings, some sense of the initial not wonderful financial picture, recognizing that financial picture was generated with pessimistic parameters to start with, so it's gonna look bad. That doesn't mean it's definitely bad, it's just we're starting in a place that's as conservative as possible and then figuring out where to go. Given that they have to nonetheless wring the cost out of that or figure out some way to make that work, I'm worried about some of the stuff here that you asked for that either I don't know how they would do it, or I don't know that they're gonna have the time, so,
Yeah, and again, these were things that occurred to me
yeah.
in the category of questions that I'm gonna ask.
Yeah.
Questions that I expect people at town meeting will ask. But I thought they were all questions that they ought to be able to answer. And so, the only question was whether we're gonna answer them up front or wait for the questions to be asked. I didn't think in doing this, based on mine, I haven't gone to many of the meetings, but based on my understanding of what they're doing, the work that's been done, the consultants that paid to do this, that my expectation was that this would be information that would exist in the collective minds of the committee that I thought would be important to call out in the concept design. And like you, the main purpose I see for this, one, is to be helpful to the committee, and two, so that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So they don't spend 3 months working on something and then come to us and we say, wait a second, there's 6 other questions you have to answer, or people in town start saying, because they're very close to this issue. And when you're very close to it, you don't always have, it's hard for you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not close to it. And I thought one of the things we could offer is, for people who aren't quite as close to it, here's some stuff that we think you ought to address.
So let me give you my
Yeah.
comments on the bullets. And again, like Pete, I'm not necessarily trying to get rid of any bullets, but I had reactions to some of them.
Yeah, I'm not married to any of them.
So the comparable master plans, the only point I'd make there is that there are not very many comparable master plans of state hospitals bought by towns and being redeveloped. So oddly enough, with Pete's reduction of your bullet, that probably softened it up so much that they're gonna be able to come up with information about comparable master plans, but it's not gonna look like what this town did or what that
Yeah.
town did with a hospital that they bought.
I wouldn't
It's gonna be
describe it that,
softened.
I would describe it as 100 acres in Massachusetts with old buildings on it.
Okay.
That's been redeveloped.
So I think some of that, given that way, then I
Yeah,
think.
no, I'm not saying redevelopments of state hospitals. If you look at, I'm saying comparable, 100 acres, at least, old buildings on
Yep.
it. That have been, it doesn't have to be a master plan a town came up with either.
Yep.
A private developer did a master plan on something that would be just as
That-
valuable.
Softening it up that way, I
Yeah.
think that's reasonable. Second bullet, I had editorial, but don't worry. Third and fourth bullets, we're saying the greatest short-term economic value. Bill, I'm gonna invite you to jump in if you wanna add or clarify or improve what I say. Kathy McCabe, the consultant that they have working with them on this, has brought up the point that when you're developing real estate, many companies, towns make the mistake of cashing in on the quick cash on something upfront, when in fact, if they would look from a more long-term standpoint, they would get more economic value out of certain things if they deferred, and I think she commented to me in this in the context of the land where the cottages are, that would be a quick sale. But that land may be more valuable once there's more development up there. And so she was cautioning me, saying, if the town can be somewhat patient around that exact cash flow. When we talk about short-term economic value, that reads to me as sales. When in fact, we may not be selling certain things, we may be, the question of sales versus lease in real estate development, as I understand it, has more to do with the economic attractiveness to the developer in terms of the cash you have to come up with up front. So I anticipate we may have some recommendations that don't involve just a straight sale and move on. There may be some other things. So for me, I said it's not just the short-term economic value, it's the clear picture of the cost to the town of whatever the town does versus the benefits to the town in terms of achieving town objectives. That's not automatically just short-term economic gain.
And so I played with the language of those 2 bullets more than,
Okay.
and I came up with short-term economic value. It's probably the wrong way to do it. I mean, I was thinking in terms of highest and best use. If your goal was to maximize the amount of money, if you looked at this purely from a business standpoint, if you were to maximize the amount of money on that property, what would you do with it?
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And so my thought was, you should start there. okay, what is the use that will, and you could say, over some period of time, over, you don't have to get into some complicated discounted cash flow analysis or something, but some way that if you were a private owner and you were selling the land, you inherited that land from your great-great-grandfather, you're selling it and you're moving out of town, so all you want is the maximize the amount of money you're gonna get, which could be by selling it, it could be by leasing it, whatever it is. Start there,
Okay.
right? And then, if
Okay.
you're departing from that, explain why you're departing from that.
Okay.
Right?
That,
Say-
I like that.
That,
Okay,
that was,
but
and
that's-
I said highest and best use, but I know that has some kind of, technical real estate meaning that I don't exactly know what it is, and
Yeah.
so that was the idea, the economic, the most bang for your buck economically as a pure owner of the property. Start there. What would that be, right? And then if they say, we're recommending that, why do we think that's the case? If we're not recommending that, why not?
Okay.
That was sort of, because I think a chunk of people in the town will look at this purely as an economics issue. And they certainly will understand the trade-off between short-term value and long-term value, and selling it for a lot into a use that's gonna have long-term cost to the town is a short-sighted thinking, people understand that. But I think if you're gonna say, look, we're gonna leave some economic value on the table, we have to explain why
Okay.
we're doing that. Because for a lot of people, for taxpayers who don't walk up there, don't have any particular emotional attachment to it, who don't really think of it anything other than as something that may cause their taxes to go up or down, for people like who in that position, we owe them an explanation as to why. We're not just trying to do the thing that will have the most beneficial impact on their taxes.
Okay, I get that.
Highest and best use, I think, gets you there.
That gets you there? All right.
Okay. There were some other minor edits. On the next bullet down, I had up the last sentence, and let's see, Pete, did you just get rid, Pete, you eliminated it, so perhaps this is a moot point. But your point about school-related costs, I couldn't follow that point. So I actually think I know what you're trying to say. Couldn't follow. Pete just deleted it completely, so we either just don't put that explanation in.
I'm
Or-
fine taking it out. I think the precision point is more important to me than the last point. I mean, I think the last point is just that you can't analyze this by saying, well, we project there'll be 150 kids. Our per pupil expenditures last year is 15,000. We're gonna multiply 15,000 times 150.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
there's the marginal cost of the town of this development. Like, it's just not.
I think you guys know that.
Yeah,
You
if
kinda-
you add 3 kids, it's not gonna be 3 times the cost of
Yeah.
each child per year,
There's no
so,
way to calculate what the actual cost is.
yeah, you have to use some sort of shortcuts to
Right,
come
but
up
it's
with
always going to
estimates.
overstate the amount of the costs, right? And a lot of times that was used specifically to overstate the amount of cost of development for people who don't want the developments. And so you can't do it precisely, but to simply say, well, we're gonna take this number, multiply it by 15,500, and then, calculate the tax revenue, here's the gap. And I think that will, for people who are interested in opposing development,
Yeah.
that's the way to express it, to try to say, look, here's how much it's gonna cost, when it's really not gonna cost that.
The problem is nobody's come up with an incremental method of determining what the cost of an additional student is. We can make a guess as to what we think the project school costs are going to be 25 years from now. I've got a number, I can tell you what the number is 25 years from now. I mean, it's as good a forecast as any, based on history, based on what's happening in the state and everything else. But how do you incrementalize that against a particular student? Nobody's come up with a way to do that.
So to Mike's point, because somehow or another, the committee's probably gonna have to come up with however shoddy a way of doing it that they can to answer the question. Would it be fair to say the committee understands this concept well enough that you could expect that projected cost to not be X number of students times the average cost? It won't be that big a number, it'll be something less than that, based on,
I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not sitting on this financial subcommittee,
okay.
so I don't know what they're.
Well, I am, so I can commit that we won't use just the number of additional students times the average cost per student.
So pick a number,
We'll
I
figure
mean,
it out.
it's, pick a, you wanna.
I might even be able to tell you what we do by the time we get to that question. But I think they get that.
I mean, I think as we've seen over the last 10 years, the increases are a lot of times unrelated to the school population.
Yeah,
It's related to the program, the size of the program you're running,
yeah.
right? We can cut a lot from the budget. and
There
lower the
is
per
no
pupil.
doubt, though, that if there was some huge increase, surge in the number of children here or whatever, that there is some clear impact on the school system, both on costs, both on perhaps the quality of education or anything else. I don't know how to define it.
No question, that it's like anything else, the bigger the number gets, you suddenly have an impact, right? So if you figure out, I mean, the way I would do it is, I would just look at the overall capacity of the school buildings. How many classrooms do we have? And within that capacity,
The real cost is personnel.
it is, but it's, one teacher, I mean, the reality is that certainly in the high school, the growth of personnel has not been affected by the declining number of students, right? It's affected it at the elementary school level because it's easy, right? You have 12 first grades, you go to 11 first grades, you lose one. That's kind of the relationship. But if you're, as we've done, as we continue to augment the program that we offer, you add more personnel to implement those programs. And the same is true at high school. If you're gonna have a Spanish program, right, one Spanish teacher can probably teach up to 100 kids, right? But if you're gonna have a Spanish program, you have to have that teacher whether you have 2 kids in Spanish or 100 kids in Spanish, right? And it's driven by the nature of the programs. You have all sorts of interests that folks have in kind of ancillary kind of, social programs, emotional programs, and the rest that add personnel that are unrelated to the number of students as well.
It's probably greater in the elementary school, the impact of personnel.
It's more direct. It's more direct. You sort of have a fixed set of costs of running a school system, and those fixed costs always get spread across. If you add more taxpayers, they get spread across a large number of taxpayers.
And nobody's looked at the impact on OPEB or anything else either, personnel changes or whatever. I mean, so there's all kinds of things that are missing from this equation. I mean, it just happens to be about the only way you can get some kind of a handle on what the numbers are.
And that's my point about precision, that we can't sell the idea that we're gonna tell you exactly what the model is. You can do directionally. This is what it will
You
do.
can say that about anything. What's the value of the property 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 4 years from now when it goes on? What's the housing market like? What's being built? What are developers? What are tax credits available? I mean, there's very little precision involved in these numbers. They're essentially estimates, guesstimates.
And that's my only point, that it shouldn't be presented, and I don't say that it's going to be.
I don't think it's going to be. I think it's on a little higher altitude than.
And I think that's.
And the idea of ranges has already been discussed.
Yeah, no,
But
that's.
again, I can't speak for, I'm not speaking for the committee.
So, going to the next point, Mike, I actually am going to pair it up with those earlier ones around the highest and best. I think actually, now that I realize what those first two were, is you're asking the committee to give us a benchmark estimate of the highest economic value that this property could be put to. So if we were just to look at it's an opportunity cost question. What's the absolute most valuable way we could use this property if we were just looking at straight return? What would that be? And then down here on the status quo bullet you have and also give us a stake in the ground around what it's gonna cost us if we did absolutely nothing deliberately and allowed ourselves the status quo, board it up, let it melt, and only do those things that we're forced to do when we're forced to do them, so that we kind of have two cost numbers, however imprecise they're gonna be, that give us a sense of what are we giving up if we don't do everything we could just to make a lot of money, and what are we letting ourselves in for if we just decide to do nothing and procrastinate and pay as you go.
Yeah, and I think that's always been
Yeah.
a part of their
Okay.
plan to present that number.
I think so. The last bullet you had here, it's important for the committee to show its work. I wrote down, I'm not sure what this means in concrete terms. For the committee that's worked for 3 years, you're asking for, research, identify things. And there were 2 pieces to it. Number one is asking the committee to sit there and say, we'd like you to document your work and organize your research and lay it all out. I think that would probably put everybody over the edge on a January special town meeting. But number 2, I'm not sure who would ever use that. The piece, what I read into that bullet that you're asking for is, when you go to the town, the taxpayers are gonna ask questions. You committee need to be prepared to come into that meeting with sufficient grasp of your research and sufficient consideration of alternatives that you didn't choose and why you didn't choose them, so that when you get asked questions, not only you tell people what you're recommending, but you can also go to that next couple of rings out and explain why you didn't do this. I know this sounded like a good idea, but here's what didn't work, in order to be seen as a credible committee in front of the taxpayers. I think that's what you're.
It is, I mean, to me, this last bullet point here, the way I would do this if I were them, if I were the committee, is I would just go through my agendas and my minutes for the last 3 years. And you can create, you know, because what I think a lot of people are gonna do is they're going to wanna go on a website and read something about this, right? And to me, we would want it to be the first place people would go, would be to this master concept design document. And they can read it, come away from the document feeling a ton of work went into this. Here's all the things they looked at, here's all the people they met with, right? And I mean, this stuff exists, right? I mean, you could probably piece it together from the website now, but people aren't gonna do that, right? People aren't gonna say, well, they make this recommendation, what do they know? You know, they're not gonna go through and look back to the agendas and say, well, you know, the Catalyst Committee met with 48 different whiskey distillers and farmers and the rest of it, came up with this proposal, or, you know, the consultant, this is the research the consultant did on market, here's the market surveys they did, here's the way they looked at that. And it's mostly organizing what's gonna be there in the agendas and minutes already, so people can look at it and say, you know what, wow, you know what I mean? Rather than, we don't want the first place people to go to be kind of, I heard that X, Y, and Z, now there's 38 comments based on what I heard that. Boom, here's the document, it's not 100 pages long. It shows your work in just in the sense that here's how we get there, right? Maybe you have a little FAQ section, why aren't we doing this, why aren't we doing that, why are we doing that, you answer those questions, and then you have, you call it bibliography, or you call it whatever you call it. Here's all the stuff we did, here's all, because they've done a massive amount of work. Right, here's the stuff we did done on the grounds, here's the work the Buildings and Ground Committee's done. All these things that have gone into this thing, you'll look at it in one place. If you're someone who's new to the town, who's moved in the last 2 years, who's never been to a hospital committee meeting, who's never been to a town meeting, but suddenly you hear, wait a second, I walked my dog up there and something's gonna happen there, now I'm interested. You can go there and say, this is what the committee has done. And you know, I think the consultant could do a lot of that, and I just think it's important to have one-stop shopping for, you know, the delta of people from the X number of people who've attended some session already to the much larger number that will be at the special town meeting. And at least, maybe they won't look at it, but at least say, look, you know what, that's as informed as you're gonna be. And then you have to, you know, answer the questions in person.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, some parts of that sound easy, some parts of it sound hard. The one thing I would add to it, you shouldn't lose sight of, is that the committee is planning to do some public outreach. And so they'll be putting materials together that are intended to help people come up to speed. So somewhere between what they're doing there, what they can, what's actually documented that way. I mean, some pieces, some of it is just like what you described. Some parts of it I don't think is. So it'll be, you know, there's pieces that are included. I think the minutes,
They're all online.
they're all online, so certain pieces of this won't be a problem at all. So those are the issues that I had. What I'm gonna suggest as the next step forward on this, that we take Pete's version of the document where he crossed out a bunch of stuff. I will take his document, I will, just simply to make it easier for you to read, the only real significant stuff I had were what you just heard from me, but I can insert them just as comments, just so they're easier to read, send it to you. I'm okay, you know, what Pete deleted, I'm okay with, but we can come back and push back if it seems like something needs to be done. I'll add my comments about the bullets themselves, and then Mike, if you could do another iteration of this, and maybe we can look at it in 2 weeks. So, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I haven't been involved in this process basically because I haven't been asked to be. I'd just like to make sure, going back to basics, that you understand that you're not only talking a rezone of the property or potential rezone and what that entails, you're also going to have to, if you're going to dispose of the property, that's a change in municipal use. That requires a town meeting action, in fact, a 2/3 vote of town meeting to dispose of the property. So if you're gonna sell it or lease it or anything to third parties, that also requires a separate town meeting action. which can take place at the same meeting, but
But
It
if
needs
you
to be
don't know,
addressed.
if you don't have specific plans in place to do that,
you don't have to. I mean, you could do the zoning, you could do the rezone with anticipation at some point, if that passed, that you would then come back with a
When you get your
proposed
developer.
disposition of the property or not.
Yeah.
I believe they're looking at an overlay district as part of this.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if you're going to dispose of it to third
Oh, no,
parties.
no, I understand, no,
Okay.
but, listen, they're not ready to dispose of the property in January, so.
I think it would be more likely that if January is a successful meeting, there could be some early disposition of property in time for the April town meeting. But you kind of almost need to know that people are on board with the concept before.
Well, the other thing too is any zoning changes have to go to the
You gotta go to
Attorney
Attorney
General.
General, right?
He has 90 days.
So that would work out well.
Although if you have a special town meeting, it's off the peak season, you probably get the approval more promptly.
Okay.
So anything else on the State Hospital Planning Committee guidance?
Suggest you get it out rather quickly if you're gonna
Otherwise, they'll be done.
fly with it.
Well, I'm guessing it might take one more meeting.
Our next item then is the Veteran Service Officer issue. And I gather we've had another applicant and,
Yeah, we have, and we've also been talking about two of the neighboring towns about the possibility of forming a district. And there is a remote possibility that we might be able to do that. So we are exploring that, and hopefully we'll have some
Yeah,
progress
I have
on
a
that.
call into one of them to set up a discussion about that, but I haven't heard back. But I left to go to the Affordable Housing Trust meeting, so I haven't checked my voicemail yet.
so we're up to 4 applicants now, I think?
Yes, yeah. A couple of them, though, want to do it very part-time, nights and weekends, which I don't think is unacceptable. So we're really
At
down
two?
to 2, I think, I would say, yeah.
Okay, then I think I have those resumes, because there was one resume I know that I didn't get that I had asked you for. But can I bring up the issue of the fact that the outreach worker at the Council on Aging is leaving? Does that present an opportunity for us to maybe meld that position
We
and
can, we can explore that with the Council on Aging to find out if that's the direction they would be interested in taking,
I
so.
can tell you
yeah.
from having explored that with Roberta on Friday, that her reaction is, I don't want to lose any of my time. So that if you had a 1.5 full-time equivalent position, and she was still guaranteed her 1 full-time position, I don't think she'd mind. But she doesn't want to lose anything that she has, is what she told me.
That's the trouble with all of these, they, you know,
Well,
they all
but
want to add, but
you-
no one wants to do,
Run through the
to
math.
incorporate.
What did she say?
That she doesn't want to lose anything that she already has.
What does she already have?
She has a full-time,
So she has 1 full-time person. So if there was a half-time, if she got a half-time from this VSO, does that mean she's saying, oh, I still want a full-time? Or is she saying, I wouldn't want to lose the half-time, but that VSO's not filling?
I think that the opportunity that it presents is that we have a 1.5 full-time equivalency between that position and the Veteran Service Officer. And there might be an opportunity to hire a social worker who could work at the Council on Aging, but who knew Veteran Service
Right.
Officer issues. Boston College has a program in social work where they train people.
So is Roberta saying, I wouldn't want to lose the half that's left over?
No, she doesn't want to lose her full-time person. But if you bundled the full-time person at the Council on Aging with the half-time Veteran Service Officer position, so you still have a 1.5 full-time equivalency, and somehow,
But we need a full-time VSO. Right, the way, the opportunity here is to have a full-time VSO who's a part-time social worker at the Council on Aging, and then the Council on Aging gets a part-time social worker, so they're getting a full-time equivalent, half the VSO time and a part-time
Right.
social worker.
but I mean.
But they have a full-time social worker now that they're looking to replace.
No, I understand. that.
Okay,
But I'm saying that's, Roberta would like to keep a full-time social worker.
correct.
But if we are required by state statute to hire a full-time veteran service officer, then the overall priority for the town might suggest we hire a full-time VSO who spends half of his or her time as a social worker at the Council on Aging, and then the Council on Aging gets a part-time social worker in addition to that, you still have 1.5 times, you're simply flipping, whereas now we have a part-time, or until June, we had a part-time VSO and a full-time social worker. We're now gonna have a full-time VSO, but who's half
However
a
you,
social worker.
however you define it, I think there's an opportunity to
Right.
make it work
That's the
better.
opportunity. The opportunity is not that we're gonna have a full-time VSO and a full-time social worker.
I think Roberta's gonna be in my office at 8:25 tomorrow morning.
May well, but I'm saying, and maybe it's just not gonna work, but I'm saying, that's the opportunity, right? Ron, am I wrong? I mean,
I think that's the opportunity, yes.
So, Pete, what Roberta has now in her budget is enough to pay for one full-time person.
She is a full-time outreach worker, yeah.
We need a full-time person, we need a person hired full-time who has a half-time job being a VSO. If we found a person that had social working skills, the other half of that person's time could cover half of Roberta's full-time position. The only question is Roberta saying, then I want to hire another full-time person for that half-time? Or is she saying, no, I'd be okay hiring another half-time person. I just don't want to lose the full-time equivalent of a social worker here. And I think the answer right now is, we're not sure.
no, I'm fairly confident she doesn't wanna have half a VSO and a half-time social worker.
Well,
I'm
She wants a
100%
full-time
confident
social
on that,
worker.
yeah.
then Pete, I don't know what she told you.
That she doesn't want to lose what she has, and so
But
that,
she's gonna lose what she has.
no, she's,
So what is it
well,
that she has?
she doesn't have to. I mean, if you combined a 1.5 time position,
What is a one, well, that's, I guess maybe that's, what is a 1.5 time position?
well, say you hired a social worker who had VSO experience,
Yeah.
and they worked at the Council on Aging,
Yeah.
and you also hired a half-time position who also worked at the Council on Aging, you have
Right.
a 1.5 time position
Yeah.
that covers
So you heard
the,
that.
covers
I think
both
we
the
can work
Council
with
on
that.
Aging.
I think we could work with that, if that's what she really needs.
It's not what she,
So, what you just said sounds totally reasonable, and that would be really good. Well, what we're getting is.
I mean, I think what you have to do is make it work for the Council on Aging, and the way to do that, in my mind, would be to create a 1.5 time position there that also
It
services
covers
the
yeah, I
veterans.
mean, if this is a budget structuring issue, I don't think we have a problem. If she could get an extra half-time person, if that extra half-time person is covering the half-time VSO, we just put it in the Council on Aging budget, and if that makes everybody happy, I think we're okay.
I don't,
But you're
Well,
skeptical.
remember, whoever you hire as a VSO has to be a veteran.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
So you can't just go out and interview social workers. You would have to find someone who was,
Yeah. What I'm getting at is if Roberta's sensitivity is, I don't want my budget to be reduced by a half-time equivalent, so that that half-time worth of budget goes over to the Veterans Affairs Department, because I care, for whatever reason. I don't think we care, for whatever reason, whether the VSO's officer's salary was covered under the Council on Aging budget. And she'd actually get a half-time person more, with the understanding that that's a VSO position. Is there a reason to care?
it's finding the right 1.5 people. This is the difficulty, is gonna be the difficulty, that meets the requirements of the Veteran Service Officer and also meets the requirements of a social worker for the Council on Aging, so
But at least
if you
it's a
can find that, that
At
would
least
be,
it's a
yeah,
possibility.
yeah.
Yeah, and I would follow up with the program at BC, the social work program that has that veterans training that's part of it. And if it was this type of a position, I think that might be a lot more interesting to some of those
To
people.
them, yeah.
than, what we've had before as a VSO position.
Okay, we can do that, yeah. And you said that's,
Robert at 8:25 tomorrow.
yeah.
Okay, well,
Well, but I mean, if,
It doesn't match the job description she has sent me.
right, of course.
As soon as we had the resignation from Ms. LaValle, she sent me a job advertisement that she wanted to put posted immediately. There was no discussion of,
so just tell her that Pete relayed what she had offered, and we accepted it.
and she'll see you at 8:45.
I'm
You'll be
traveling.
finding some place for office hours, Pete.
I hope Roberta's not watching right now.
She's gonna start texting me very soon.
I don't think we're online anyway, so.
Or not,
On
not,
the other
not
hand,
a Franklin,
once the
yeah.
word gets out that we talk like this about department heads, they'll probably all start tuning in for these meetings. This is good.
There you go.
I think you do better in reruns.
I still want to bump
by
our
the way,
Nielsen ratings up 5 points.
On second thought, Gus, I think we should leave these budget decisions to the warrant committee.
Anything further on the VSO position?
Nope.
Anything on town goals document? That's, we need to get back to that.
Yep, and I'll try to do this one quicker. So the town goals, what I sent out to all of you all, and Pete, I know you just gave me some feedback, but for a minute, I'm gonna just suggest for today's discussion, both in terms of the time and in terms of the thought process here, what I did on the town goals that you got. And for some reason, I think both of you modified yours, there's a blue shading to some of the cells. I can't make it go away, but when it prints, it doesn't print out, so system, different equipment thing, it's not a big deal. I was originally gonna just reconfigure the key focus areas and the long-term goals that you had done, Mike, just to line them up. And then and then the thought was to move the annual operating goals off to another document. We may wanna move that off to another document at some point, but I actually found when I did this is a mechanical, it was intended to be a mechanical reconfiguration of what we had based on the inputs from the two of you. So I basically tried to synthesize everything into a single document. I left the annual goals in place because you can see it starts to show where we have alignment and where we have gaps. A couple points, the only major thing that I changed or interpretation I made, Mike, is I moved the OPEB points that you had made, that you had associated with the first goal. I rolled, I think you'll see why I did that, just made intuitive sense. And that's what, I think we just passed out, that was the copy that you gave me too, but
Yeah,
that's,
I'm
I haven't
taking it
seen your
back.
stuff yet. Oh,
So I can just
okay.
look at.
Oh, sure, yeah.
This is what I printed out to understand where things were.
So, there's a couple of points, I'm kind of interested at this point in knowing that we kind of like, that the structure, the 5 goals, sounds like they're okay. I have specific questions about what some of the particular goals are, but the idea of the long-term goals basically operationalizing those general focus areas, I thought was a good thing. And I didn't really try to pass judgment on the operating goals, but clearly that's what we have to drive toward, is operating goals. I had two points. If you look at if you look toward the back on those more qualitative goals, Mike, you hadn't taken a crack at any of those, but what this did so you'll see they show up as holes in terms of the goals, but the point here is that these are not, I didn't intend them when I drafted them to be the selectmen's goals. I intended these to be a statement of town goals. So when we start filling in long-term goals and annual goals, they tend to be specific things that we as a Board of Selectmen are trying to drive. So it doesn't bother me that we're leaving the 4th and 5th ones empty unless there's something that we want to try to drive in those 2 areas. I think it's perfectly fine to say, this is the town doing things like this. Those 2, because they're qualitative, are gonna have more to do, to use a recent example, these might have more to do with why it's appropriate for the Board of Selectmen to consider funding a pollinator garden at the library, because it fits in, there's a spot in the town goals that makes sense why we care and why it's something that we even think about. But if there's nothing there that's an action for us, then we're gonna leave those blank. So I'm mostly concerned about that we kind of have a structure that's okay. I wanted you to start thinking, if in fact the structure's okay, to start thinking about the holes and whether we think they belong as holes or whether they don't. And what I was gonna do next is take a look at the specifics. The one that jumped out at me, Mike, was one of yours was to make sure we hold the town departments to 2.5% budget growth, and I was sitting there saying, that hasn't been our problem area, so we don't need that as a goal. It's the overall, but so we'll have some discussions about that.
Well, I would like, if you are gonna do that, I do think it's a little unfair to say you're gonna keep the town departments under 2.5%, but exempt the school
Well,
department.
that's my point.
You
That's
know,
right.
and I understand sometimes the school department has needs or wants that the town will fund above and beyond the town departments. But I think the town has showed a willingness when a town department has a need to fund it. And I think you're kind of saying the schools are exempt from financial responsibility as opposed to the town departments when you take a position like
That was the
that.
reaction I had to, that's the point that I was making about that. That was the one that came to mind for me.
And I will say that I put much less thought into the substance of the long-term goals and into the kinds of things that I think we ought to identify as
Yeah,
long-term.
yeah,
The level of
yeah.
specificity at which we ought to operate
Right.
in setting goals. Not so
Right.
much putting one goal in the view of the other, it's just gotta be specific enough that
Yeah.
committees, other people can sort of measure what they're doing.
So anyway, if you can, if this seems like it's a reasonable structure, and it looks like it's got the right major categories from your all standpoint, then I think we're at a point where we can start to fill this in.
So this is a list dating back to January of things that were on the to-do list for the
Yep.
the Board of Selectmen. So that's,
Yep.
somehow that needs to get factored into this.
Or.
Or-
Pass that out to us yet? Do I have that?
Well, it was before you came, so I don't
Oh.
know that, Chris gave it to me, I don't have it in electronic.
I can send it to you electronically.
Yeah, if you can send it to me. I
Sure.
don't think I
Why don't you
don't
send it to
recognize-
all of us?
But if you do that, I'm more than happy to try to
Oh,
map the
excellent.
stuff.
Okay.
You know, it's, at this point, if this is on a good track, then it's a matter of doing the detail work to get it to something that we like. It's not, we're not debating the basic concept, we're just trying to keep the work out.
I like it.
Okay. Licenses and permits. Memo request permission to hold the 38th Annual Discover Medfield Day on Saturday, September 16, 2017, 9 to 3 p.m. Additionally, request a common victualer's license and permission to hang a banner that's already hanging across Main Street announcing the event. Request selectmen vote to sign letter requesting same.
So I would move, this effectively our consent calendar for this, for the licenses and permits.
Yes, it is, yeah.
So I would move that we grant Memo's request, including a retroactive ratification of their decision to hang a banner over Main Street and vote to sign a letter. And I'd also move that we approve the other items on the consent calendar as requested.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Yep. And then, acceptance and correction of the minutes from the June 6th and June 20 meetings.
I would move that we accept them as corrected by Pete. Second, have any other corrections?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Yep.
Aye.
Town administrator update.
Update, yeah, there's a couple of things. I don't know if you happened to notice, but the gazebo roof has been completed and replaced. And the work on the town hall roof and a gutter in the back of the town hall is underway, and that should be done probably by the end of the week, depending on the weather.
I like your new back door.
Yes, yeah, and the gutter will prevent that from rusting out the way the old one did, so. The paving came out very well, I think, and with the minimal disruption, I think the striping is finally being completed, so I think overall that was a very good outcome. We have a new facilities employee that started today that was approved at town meeting. He is going to help out Jerry McCarty, and he's strong, has strengths particularly in the area of HVAC. The big problem Jerry is running into now that is, to a certain degree, precluding him from doing the things we hired him to do, although he is doing that as well. But he's, you know, as I said to him, we hired you to look at the big picture, and you're running around fixing leaks in roofs and toilets and patching, you know, HVAC and boiler problems. So this should be a big help to him. as I said, he's just finishing up on the 20-year capital plan, and we'll get that to you for that meeting when they're coming in, but he's doing a terrific job overall, and this should be a big help to him. Chris and the assessors have scheduled interviews this week for the halftime position that was approved for the assessor's office, so that should be underway. I understand they feel some good candidates, so.
Very good.
And we discussed the Veteran Services position. Of course, school's open. That seemed to go very well. There was very little problems with busing or anything like that. I think the new bus schedule worked out very well. And then we did have a short meeting with Mr. Kelly this morning regarding the Dale Street. And they have agreed to go back and review their plans again, and hopefully they seem to be getting a bit more reasonable. But it was just Chris, Sarah, myself, and Mike. So it's very, yeah. So that's about it. And
Good, thank you. Mr. Marcucci.
Yeah,
Selectmen report.
just quickly, so the outcome from the meeting with Kelly was that I think his next step is they're going to come to an Affordable Housing Trust meeting and meet with the Affordable Housing Trust. I mean, I think they recognize that at least until May, the only way they're gonna get anywhere is if it's with something that the town is going to support from the outset. And so we'll see what they come back with, and, you know, we invited them to the meeting in October. If they're not ready for the meeting in October, they'll come to a future meeting. But I think that's their next meeting. It won't be another, it will be public and an open meeting, but it won't be sort of a public comment type meeting. They'll present to the Affordable Housing Trust what they're proposing for that location. You know, for what it's worth, he seemed a little more, you know, seemed somewhat reasonable and willing to listen to some of the concerns that have been raised and try to figure something out. And then also report on the Affordable Housing Trust Board meeting that we had prior to this one. In between our last two meetings, a member of the board met with each of the developers who has a prospective project in the works. And so there's about a half a dozen of them in different places around town. Board members went and met with those and reported back. I think we have, the trust expressed support for the Tilden Village expansion. There was a request that did not have a dollar amount attached to it from Candace Lowen for support. They don't have enough money to hire a lawyer to negotiate the contract with the Newgate developer who has stepped forward to offer to build the Tilden Village expansion. So the trust board voted its approval for funding that expense, but one of the members who is sort of designated as the liaison to Tilden Village and the Housing Authority is gonna go meet with them to get a more specific budget for what they actually need, so we can have a specific ask to support down the road. They have identified a law firm that has negotiated these kind of deals on behalf of other housing authorities, and so it's mostly a matter of figuring out what the funding would be to kind of get that done and move forward. So I think there's some cautious optimism that they're ready to go ahead. And
Does the trust have funding?
well, the trust does not have, the trust has about $50,000 that can be transferred from the Community Development Corporation. We had a preliminary discussion about the budget and what the budget might be in terms of making a request against the bond that was approved last year. I think we have to understand from the Tilden Village standpoint what the actual ask is and whether it's something that can be accommodated within the funds transferred from the CDC as opposed to something that would have to go in part of a larger budget. We just don't know the answer to that. We didn't even get sort of a sense of the magnitude. We also expressed our support to go ahead with two different rental projects in downtown, one of which I think Christine can update as well from Bob Borelli, expects to be at our meeting on the 19th with respect to his proposal next door to the one that he already has. Looking for a letter of support from the Board of Selectmen. It's another 8 units, all rental, 2 affordable, all 8 would count on the SHI. And then another one is one on North Street that Tim Bonfatti went and met with the developer there. It's a similar type, it's 14 units as opposed to 8. But that also seemed like a promising option, so Tim's gonna push ahead. But there's general support from the board of the Affordable Housing Trust for those two, that obviously if those two were to go ahead, that would be 22 units that we have to have approved by the middle of April, by May, essentially, for our certification. And then we followed up on several other options. Suzanne Sino was there and gave us an update on discussions that the Medfield Inclusion Project is having with prospective group home developers. It sounds like the group home initiative is gonna be something more for the second half of next year. I think that they're looking at the hospital as a possible location with potentially a second one somewhere else in town, but she's not sure on the timing. It doesn't sound like those are gonna be part of kind of the year 2 safe harbor project. So they probably not, it doesn't sound like they're gonna be done by May.
The good news on those is that she seems to have the state funding
Yes.
to
No,
support them so that they're real.
Yep, no, she has funding for them. They have a developer or an operator they're working with, so it seems like it's in good shape. Just from a timing standpoint, it seems like it's not gonna happen before May. We had a meeting with the Larkins about the Legion. We had a meeting about a proposal for a building next to the Goddard School. And so, there's a lot of kind of irons in the fire. I think the best short-term options are probably the two downtown sort of rental projects, and then Tilden. I mean, Tilden is one that, given the presence of Newgate and their experience with these kind of projects, and once that deal is done and signed, they will kind of operate it and handle it, they'll pay for it, and there won't be a lot of work to be done on the town side in terms of advancing it, and not a lot of work on the housing authority side either. It sounds like it's basically gonna be a turnkey operation. So overall, it's a very positive meeting today. We're gonna meet again the first Tuesday of October. And, Mr. Burley will be here on the 19th with respect to his, and we're trying to push ahead and advance the ball with respect to the other one as well, downtown.
Thank you.
You actually discussed 158 to 168 units.
In total today, if you count the Tilden.
Until 2020 or 21, then I will update that.
I mean, it's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's probably out through 2019 or 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, the sense we have, for example, of the discussions between the Larkins and the Legion is that that's 2 or 3 years in the future, after the completion of the hospital Hill project.
They have an update for you.
Already, since 2 hours ago.
I've been sitting here for more than 2 hours.
2.5 hours.
I got a financing question for you, Mike. So, in a case like this, where right now you've got the trust has funding that might be enough just out of what was transferred from the CDC, let's assume it's not. How does the financing work? What if they need $100,000? Does the town issue a $100,000 bond? How does it actually work when you've authorized bonding? You can't just take out money without a purpose, but you need some.
You'd have to have some purpose
Yeah.
for it, but then you can borrow, I believe, up to 2 years in advance on something called the bond anticipation note. So you take out a short-term note for $100,000, and then within the 2 years, you would roll that into the $1 million bond if the town decides it needed to float the $1 million bond.
Otherwise, you wind up having to float some smaller bond. If over 2 years, you wound up, the trust needed $250,000, the initial response to that need would be that short-term note, bond anticipation note. But then within 2 years, you'd have to float a bond for $250,000. If that was the end of it, you'd float a bond for $250,000.
Float a permanent, well, you could float a permanent bond, but it's very expensive to float a permanent bond for $250,000. It'd probably cost you 25% of the amount you're floating. And that's why you want to do the bands to the extent possible. The ideal thing to do with this $1 million is to combine it with, say, a water project. So you do sell a $5 million bond for a water project and a $1 million bond for the affordable, and then you split the cost of the bond issuance between the two. But in the interim, you can do up to 2 years you can probably do it as part of a State House note, or you can do it as a short-term ban from a bank, and you can get that money in a couple of weeks.
What I'm trying to get my head wrapped around is you've got a trust that would like to not use the money that it's been authorized to borrow if it can avoid having to use it. So all things being equal, you don't want to spend any more of that $1 million in that trust than you have to.
Right.
But then you got this awkward thing that says, but if we do a really good job of that, but we do spend some of it, then we have this little, rump bond here that's not really the full amount. At some point, we have to do something with it. So I guess you'd fold that small amount in a larger.
Or there are other ways to look at it. You might float them a loan from the stabilization fund or something like that. There are ways you could look at it to
Okay.
minimize the cost to the town.
I will say that in the category of the problems that we have, sort of achieving the goals of the trust at a lower cost is probably one of the easier problems to solve, right? They're probably, each of them is gonna be better than the alternative. But I think there's probably gonna be enough other borrowing events over the next few years that you could add them on
Yeah.
as necessary.
Yeah.
But at least as of right now, I mean, we had preliminary discussions about what our budget would be. We don't have definitive enough asks on any of these things. I mean, I think with respect to the downtown rental projects, we'll do the same thing we did with respect to 67 North Street. We'd support the marketing plan, that kind of assistance. We'd offer the services of Community Opportunities Group to assist on that stuff,
Yep.
pay for them. But we don't, I think the larger asks will likely be associated potentially with Tilden, potentially with the group homes, and sort of, that'll be the bigger chunks of what we'll use some of that money for in implementing the plan.
Have you guys talked about whether or not you needed that employee that would assist you as opposed to the consultant, or
We concluded
you
today
seem to be
that
doing well?
we're fine with the consultant for now.
Okay.
Hopefully we wouldn't need an employee. Obviously the consultant on a per hour basis is gonna be more expensive, but, they're also easier to get rid of once you sort of don't
Yep.
really need them anymore. So I think for now, we'll see, we are gonna put out an RFP for another year of a consultant that presumably COG will respond to, other people could respond to. And so we'll kind of extend that beyond. We're coming up towards the end of the contract that's been approved for them already. And so we'll need to re-up that. But I think the consensus of the trustees was that we're fine with a consultant for now and kind of take this step by step until we need somebody. We don't think we need a full-time or even part-time employee. Unless there's a veteran who comes along, who's an affordable housing specialist, then we'll reconsider the whole thing, so.
All right, anything else? Gus?
We had an ALS study committee meeting
2 weeks ago, Chris?
2.5 weeks ago. We had Brewster Ambulance come in, and it was a very productive, open discussion around what the option of going the route of hiring an ambulance service. We got some great insights into how that would work, how it works in terms of the resident fire staff with the ambulance. So this was still just a brainstorming, open exploration. This was not pursuing a specific option, but it was basically a very informative discussion. We have our next meeting next Tuesday, so I think we're trying to get fire chiefs in.
I think we're,
Medical
you and I need to
control
talk about the
officers,
agenda.
okay,
so I can
yeah,
post it
so,
tonight.
we need to, we're, at this point, we're still reaching out to key people, and, I think in order to get the job done, a lot of this is gonna happen we have sub-teams that are focused on particular areas, and it's such a complex topic that we've got those sub-teams going out as well. And, we're still working against a deadline of wanting a draft report for you to review at the beginning of December, so that 8th of December, whatever the date was, that kind of works well with our current schedule in terms of being able to present the draft report. And then we'll go from there. There was also an initial meeting of the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee's finance sub-team, so the one that Bill mentioned several times he was not part of, I am part of. And we had some initial, so there's been some initial estimates that have been put together for the different parcels of the state hospital, in fact, for all the parcels. Again, they have been conservatively analyzed, what that means is the costs have been estimated to be worst-case costs, the revenues been conservative revenues, and for a lot of the residential stuff, that relates to assumptions about numbers of units or nature of units and things like that. So in the first glance look, it looks kind of murky, but I think that's, we're actually discussing the fundamental, is the fundamental concept actually in a ballpark? And if it is in the ballpark, what do you have to do to make it look like it would be okay? So it'll be a tough process to get through, but we got a good start on it last week, so that's working. The third item I had, and I thought it was gonna be on the agenda, but it wasn't, and Pete, you at least also got contacted on this, so maybe you did too, Mike, because I think Russell Morse contacted each one of us separately. The issue was traffic on Hospital Road, and this guy lives like right at the corner there, so he, and I know there's been other people that have come and complained about the speed of the traffic coming down Hospital Road as it hits the intersection with Harding Street. So the way I looked at it and the conversation I had is there's two issues. One issue is an immediate short-term safety issue, which is cars coming down Hospital Road hit the Hardings, that are going into town. So they're not making the left turn onto Harding Street to leave town, they're making the right curve. They're coming around that curve at 40 miles an hour, even though there's a blinking thing there that says 25. So there's an immediate question of what, if anything, needs to be done to make that safer. I can tell you from, on the rare occasions I drive Hospital Road, I'm not trying to drive fast. Hospital Road's a 40-mile-an-hour zone. And what happens is there's a curve just before you get to Harding Street. There's a warning sign in front of that curve that says 25-mile-an-hour zone ahead. Well, I make a left turn to get onto Harding Street. So as I'm approaching that curve, my foot is off the accelerator. But as you come around that curve, slightly downhill, and just about 31 miles an hour is where I show up on the screen. I'm not trying to do anything other than just make a left turn. But I see the warning sign, I don't drive the road soon enough, often enough, you don't actually see the 20, in fact, the 25-mile-per-hour zone is where the flashing light is. So you're coming around the blind corner, and then you get nailed by the light. And then, depending on what kind of a driver you are, you either get frustrated with a light that sits there and gets in your face when you don't have a chance to kind of do it the right way, so you just blow it off and say, well, it's 30, 35, and 40 once I get back down on Harding Street a little bit farther down anyway, and you blow around it. Or, like me, you just kind of, and I have to slow down to make the left turn anyway. So there's a short-term issue, and then the other point that came with the message, at least the conversation I had, and I do, the plea was the town should start thinking about the infrastructure and traffic flow issues associated with Hospital Road now or soon, not later. I basically said, well, we can't do a whole lot with that until we actually know what the projects are, but it's a valid point. For what it's, this is probably an issue with the chief. So the question I'm leading up to here is, do one of us, and I'm happy to do it, it sounds like one of us should follow up with the chief unless somebody's got more information than I have. My thought would be right now, if it's easy to do, we move the 25-mile-an-hour zone to start upstream from Copperwood so that you don't have this blind corner. You just basically, people see it's a 25-mile-an-hour zone. You put the flashing light at the corner so that people have a prayer of actually complying. And then for what it's worth, this is just me, but looking forward to what we're gonna face down the road with Hospital Road, I can't see that becoming anything but a three-way stop as a T intersection, rather than what it is now. So, yeah.
When the 440 unit plan was scheduled to go in, if DCAM had sold the property, there was a traffic study done. Some of it involved redesign of the Hospital Road interchange and also the North Street interchange. So, and if you wanted to see what those were,
They were both T intersections. It was Rizzo Associates, and they said that you need to make them T intersections to make them safe.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're making that left turn off of Hospital Road after you've kicked the sign off at 31 miles per hour, the traffic coming the other way from town around that corner is also, sometimes it's worth your life to make that left-hand turn because people coming around at 45 miles an hour on that curve.
Yeah, because you have to clear the left, you have to clear the oncoming lane that you want to cross, and
So you've got it from both ways. It's not just on Hospital Road, it's
Yeah.
coming the other way as
Yeah,
well.
and plus people tend to go over the midline when they come around heading from the town out towards the hospital, they cut the corner.
So the
You
chief
know,
did,
I've seen up there too, the truck traffic is escalated there. And
Yes.
they're all going down to West Street.
Yes,
And it's.
that construction and debris place,
You know, redone out there, they're bringing materials down Hospital Road, both ways,
yep.
to get up to 27. And it's too bad they just can't go down West Street, down there, take the light, take the right on 27. That would save a lot on that road. But they go like hell, those trucks.
Well, I think there's an opportunity maybe for the town to ban truck traffic along that section and force them to go 27 and in west.
That would straighten out a lot of your problems, because somebody's gonna get killed going around that corner with a truck.
Yep.
Because the cars only, the truck drivers ride over there too.
Yeah.
And if they're on a cell
And it's a
phone.
popular road for bicyclists. The whole thing is, you have pedestrians, you have to be on the grass on the left side, well off the road. Bicyclists, it's a stop
It's a very
sign, then a
dangerous
down, and a
intersection.
railroad tracks, and it's,
It's a tough road.
yeah. And so anyway, the message was, this is an accident waiting to happen. You guys should do something about it. The question is,
Yeah.
do we take that up here? I'm guessing that maybe the first step is to refer it to Chief Meany.
so I forwarded to each of you, I was copied on an email from the chief to Mr. Morse today,
Okay.
this morning about placement of the sign and speed limit and other issues. So I forwarded to you Chief's email to Mr. Morse with some suggestions that he had. I think, I'm of the view that we do have to address this kind of intersection issue, the infrastructure issue now, because we have to plan it, right? I mean, I think obviously, you know, if you're gonna do more sidewalks, if you're gonna do something like that, that's gotta be planned out, it's gonna have to be paid for, we have to figure out what the costs are gonna be, and I keep harping on this notion that when we do the master plan, that have a sidewalk master plan as part of that, to identify really where in town sidewalks are most needed, and so, and also where they're feasible based on the amount of land we have to be, you know, given from the homeowners to build the sidewalk there. And that's obviously the safest solution for pedestrians, is to have a sidewalk, right? And I think there are plans from the DPW, and they've talked about over the years, to kind of create a sidewalk network to get you on a sidewalk from downtown to up to Hospital Hill. Now, I think their plans tend to go down Adams Street and not necessarily around, but I mean, we have to figure it out, right? If we're gonna be putting more cars on that road, we gotta figure out the answer to it. Whether it's redesigning the intersection, sidewalk, some combination of that. I think we're gonna need some sort of study to tell us what's the best way to do it. You know, I'm hard pressed to think of other roads with a similar dynamic. You know, I mean, I live on a relatively busy street with no sidewalks, but I don't really see a pressing need for sidewalks in the trailer. But it's not as much of a cut through as Hospital Road will become, it's really heavily development up there.
Well, Harding is gonna be an issue as well, because when they did the traffic study for the 440 unit development, nobody looked at Harding Street, Farm Street at all. And they were only looking at everybody going either into town or going down to Route 27. And if you actually look at the traffic, where it's going, and where, anybody who was heading for Route 16, or heading down to Newton or Wellesley or anything else, was going to go down Hospital Road, down Harding, down Farm Street, whatever, and it's, this road is not going to be built for that kind of, it's bad enough with the high school kids can only get out of school coming down Harding Street. You can imagine what it's going to be like with, 500 people or 600.
The Rizzo traffic study made what I thought was just a totally fallacious assumption, which was that something like 80% of the people were gonna go out to Route
Well,
27.
that's exactly what I meant.
And they don't.
No, and I pointed out that criticism on my plan, my criticism of the environmental study for the 440 units. They totally missed the boat on that.
And that was before we had Starbucks downtown.
That's right.
That's all I have.
Okay, well, so, I don't know if you weren't here, but we sort of had this discussion too, and Chris and I had talked about the fact that under the Municipal Modernization Act, I think the selectmen have the ability to change the speed limits in town, And so that I had proposed the same thing you're proposing, which is that we need to move the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit out beyond where Larkin is building all of his properties, so that the 25 starts when the dense housing starts. So up by the stream and
If you do that, I think you also have to take the speed limit sign on the other side, so if you're going out toward the hospital, right now, the 40-mile-an-hour speed limit sign is like right after the second house. So we have to, wherever the 25 starts, that's where the 40 needs to start going in the other
Yeah,
direction.
both directions,
I mean,
absolutely.
it probably should start at West Mill Street and go past the hospital.
No, West Mill's on, that's not the, right now, the way it works, it's coming up Harding, it's 40 miles an hour until you get to West Mill, at which time it drops to 25, I think. I think it's 25 going up the hill. Technically, once you get past that whole nest, if you're still on Harding, it's 30 till you get to the town line, at which point it's actually 35 for Junction Street, which you'd have to be hard pressed to get up to that speed if you have to slow down for the stop sign. The problem is that coming down Harding, it's all downhill slope, so most people don't go 30 miles an hour. Right? If you want to go 30 miles an hour, you just take your foot off the accelerator and don't do anything. And you're
Why don't we have the chief and Maurice look at it and report to you at your next meeting?
So the other part,
And then the point, if that moves up, then the flashing sign should move forward of the curve so that people can actually see it.
I think you have to be somewhat realistic, though. I think if you have to realize what speeds normally travel at. Because if you set a speed limit too low, I think you can create accidents that way too with,
This is, I don't, but right there, Mike, it's, you got Copperwood, you got two, it's all densely populated.
I know, yeah, I'm just thinking there, yeah, for example, if you're going down Harding Street to the railroad tracks, to go 25 miles an hour, you're probably gonna have to be on your brakes most of the way down.
Actually, no, because what happens, you go down Harding Street, and you get to a stop sign at Hospital Road. You cross that stop sign, it goes up a little bit, and then there's just that hill, so it's
And
not,
it
that's
goes
not an
down,
issue. And generally, the bicyclists are enough to make sure that you don't do anything really rash anyway, just because of that traffic. The real issue, there was a planning board meeting when the Larkins presented their traffic study, that it was somebody else who I think is on the other side of Harding Street, who was making the same plea, going, I got little kids, and what happens is when you're coming on Hospital Road going to Harding, if you're at 40 miles an hour, you're going around a blind curve. And then you're hitting Harding, which is not 40 miles an hour. That intersection itself it's not tough when you're coming down Harding, because you can see who's coming. But it's really fair to say that any little kid walking on the side of the street, almost either side of the street, it's very difficult. As an adult, it's hard to do that, because I'll get off on the grass when I have to, but I wouldn't want to walk on the grass because it's a side slope. It's just that, it's all blind, so if you see a car coming, you just step off the road. There's no way to really get down there as a pedestrian. The big challenge might be to get the eminent, the land that you could actually use for a sidewalk, for some parts of it are pretty narrow.
I know, I live on Nebo Street, and I make sure I drive 30 miles an hour in the morning, and I get some angry people behind me. I think if they set the speed limit at 25 and I drove 25, I'd probably have road rage attacks.
I caught that. A lot of people commented about Nebo Street, and I wouldn't have thought that would have been a street, but yeah, we've got a problem with that.
It's a cut through, yeah, which, people are used to, but if they would observe the 30, it would be a problem, but they want to go 40, and that's it.
So Chris, you're gonna, as far as this goes for Hospital Road, you're gonna,
I'll talk to Maurice is away this week, but when he's back, I will talk to he and the chief and have them go out and take a look at it and come to the next meeting.
Yeah. And he'll be coming in to discuss his pavement management plan, and that might be a good time to discuss some of these issues with him, particularly in terms of intersection design.
so in addition to Mr. Morris, I've also spoken in that stretch there to Tracy and Paul Hogan, who live just on the hospital side of Copperwood Road on Hospital Road, and the Abernethys, who live on the other side, at the top of Copperwood Road. And they're both very concerned about the speeding in that area. So if we can change the speed limit is one issue. Then the second issue I think that we have in town everywhere, based on the reports that we periodically get from residents who are upset about the speeding in their neighborhood, is that I don't know that we have a reputation in Medfield for high enforcement of speed limits. And that was one of the discussions that I had with Mr. Morris, actually, about, I think he said his wife commutes through Dover and she doesn't speed in Dover, because they tend to enforce a lot more than Medfield, so I think that.
Westwood too.
I think that.
Sherburne too.
We should have
Just
some
saying.
discussion with the chief about the level of enforcement in town, because even if you had the speed limit, unless there's a uniform enforcement, I don't know that we're gonna accomplish what we're looking to do. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up had to do with the trees. I noticed that the trees are gone from in front of Montrose, and so I assume that means that Bobby Kennedy Jr. had said that the town was gonna buy a couple of trees to put in front of the Montrose for them.
Yes, well, they've agreed to, I don't think they're buying them, they've.
Yeah, the
I
town's
think-
buying them, and they're putting them in
Yes,
there.
yeah, they're allowing us to put them on, and in return, they want us to remove that old stump that's in front. So that's the trade-off for them allowing us to put the trees there, so. And then Borelli will be putting his trees in
And the post
shortly.
office has given us permission to put trees in there too.
Oh, they have, okay.
I think I mentioned that before, that I spoke to the,
It's nice of them since we own the land.
they actually said that there is a master back in there somewhere. He wouldn't come out and talk to me, but.
He's afraid of anybody from the town hall right now.
But the response that I got was, as long as you're paying for the trees and we're getting the property beautified, we're okay, we're on board with it. And I asked them about watering, because you had asked about that, Mike, and they said, unions can't water.
Who can't water?
The post office supervisor said that she can't ask her people to water. It's a union issue, that she'd get grieved, so.
Whatever happened to that never, not rain, nor snow, nor sleet?
Doesn't say anything
It doesn't
about
say anything
water.
about watering the plants.
On the contrary.
Yeah. That is managed privately. It's a lease with a guy from the South Shore somewhere. Do you remember his name? It's a 50,
We leased to the post
He-
office, they subleased to this guy who built the building and then subleased it back to them.
Do we need his permission to plant trees or not?
They have control of the property.
I don't think he cares,
Yeah.
you know, as
so-
long as we water them, but,
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
But he is responsible for maintenance of the building and the grounds. So whenever we've had issues with fences falling down or lights being out, we have to chase him down, and he's very difficult to get a hold of because he doesn't,
So the other,
yes.
the other place that the ad hoc committee, tree committee, recommended trees was the strip in front of the strip mall over on 27 where Papa Gino's is.
Yeah,
They just cut them down.
Did they?
I just did. Are they
They're all
gonna,
weeping cherry and they just.
are they gonna
Didn't like 'em?
replant, do they
I
have
don't
plans to
know, 'cause
replant
I
them?
don't know, 'cause
Well,
they-
so somebody from the town should probably reach out to whoever the owner of that is and see if they'd let us put a strip of trees there if we buy them.
Yeah, I would think he did a lot of work on the buildings and to improve the appearance. I would think he'd want to do something like
Yeah.
that. You know what I think is an extraordinarily attractive parking lot as such in grounds is the Shaw's parking.
Yes.
If you go by there, they change the flowers, they rake the leaves and mulch the trees or all over the parking lot. And the planning board was responsible for a lot of that because they required them as part of the site plan to put trees in the islands, and it really has paid off in terms of the appearance of it, I think. If you compare that to almost any other shopping mall parking lot, I think you'd find it stands up.
Yeah, yeah. I actually went to the hearing when, I don't know if it was the ZBA or the planning board, and asked them to make the parking lot prettier. And I asked them to put in the islands, and I don't know whether it was because I asked them to put in the islands that they did or not, but
Well, if it was, thank you.
what was the name of the guy? It was some
Flat-
town,
Flatley, yeah,
but
Flatley.
there was a town fellow who worked for Flatley, O'Neill or something.
Jim O'Neill.
Jim O'Neill, yeah.
And he told me, he thanked me for coming, actually, because he said that allowed him to put pressure on whoever it was
The
that
property manager for
they were
Flanagan,
passing
I think.
things through, and,
Yeah.
Also a FinCom boy.
so there's an opportunity to, I think, to plant some trees this fall. If we're gonna buy a couple, we can buy 2 or 3 for the post office and maybe
Yeah.
some for that strip
I'll,
mall.
I'll see what I can find out about who owns that and whether there you have
My
plans to do
recollection
anything,
on
yeah.
the post office is that the earth piles up on the post office side up to the stone wall, so you're
Yeah.
gonna have to be careful what you put in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, Mike Leaders would give us a recommendation.
Will we have to rake the leaves?
It's not that, but it wouldn't really be able to handle anything of any size with a root system, it would just.
These were all over my yard.
Well, you can take care of it. We'll give you a senior work, we'll give you a senior work off for it.
We're counting on you watering, Tom. So anything in the informational that we should direct people to, Mike, or Chris, or Evelyn?
I think, I think it's before, is Medfield Day before their next meeting?
Yes.
The 16th, and your next meeting is the 19th, so yeah,
16th, you're not meeting until the 19th.
Right, so Medfield is before.
yeah. Yeah, so Medfield Day is coming up for, and for anybody that's new in town, it is quite an event that's gotten bigger each year, it seems to me, so.
4,164 transfer station stickers have been sold.
Yeah, the.
Nice business, bit of
total-
business.
What's the total, Evelyn, you figured 200 and,
226,950.
okay, now that's everything for this year. Now that's split into 2 fiscal years, so it's about 175,000 as of June 30th. And there should be another probably 100,000 next year in tickets, so. It covers probably about a third of the transfer station costs, so it's not, it's not a total, coverage, it just covers a small portion. There are some towns that have actually done enterprise funds for their transfer station, which are like the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund, where you have to cover all the costs with a fee. And I don't think we want to go to that right now. I think it's, I think going to 75 was a good idea. It will help quite a bit. It does cover a good portion of the cost. And I think it's remarkable when and one of the things that's helped on our budgets is if you look at the number of departments that really do cover their cost. Water and sewer, the inspection department, transfer station covers a good portion of the cost. So there are a lot of town departments that are not totally self-sufficient, but are doing a lot to actually cover their costs. So, and every bit helps these days.
Mass Bay Community College is looking for 40,000 square feet to expand. Should we put them in the
Yes.
Dale Street School?
Up at the state hospital.
It's fall now that it's habitable.
I remember when the town wrote to all the colleges in New England to see if they had any interest in the state hospital, and I remember saying to the selectmen, be careful what you ask for, you may get it. You know what college campuses are like in the spring.
So are we planning to respond to that? Or
I don't think it's, remember colleges, state colleges don't pay any taxes. They'd probably increase your security requirements for the
It's a
public
lease.
safety, for police
You'll have to split it with the state, probably.
and the traffic.
It's my understanding, I have a meeting at the Metro West Partnership later this week, but I believe they are looking for, has to be along the rail line, and they are actually looking at going to downtown Framingham.
So they were only looking, what I couldn't understand from what I saw there is it looked like they were looking to lease space in 4 towns or something like that. They're just looking for
I
one
think,
town.
I think they're
to lease
looking
space.
for, last I heard, they were looking for one town, and they were looking, it had to be, on the rail line, but
You got a rail
I'll
line.
find out.
Getting there.
Yeah, bring back the.
But I'll follow up with the 495 partnership and ask them.
so if it's
Yeah, I'll
a
find
dumb
out.
opportunity, it's a dumb opportunity, but the thing is, if it's not a dumb opportunity, I found myself saying, all right, would you give them potpourri? Or would you give them West Hall? It seems like they, community colleges,
They are tax exempt, so you.
well, yeah, but I mean, what I'm getting at is if there's a lease here, I'm not sure where the total picture with the state hospital property is gonna go. But it's possible that we don't wanna put as much housing up there as, if that's the only answer, it's possible, I can foresee the committee saying, well, the number of housing units that we'd have to have there is gonna be one thing, and it's a much bigger number than what people in general want, which means we then will have excess buildings up there. If that, or could have excess buildings. So I'm playing around possibilities.
It sounds like they wanna do it
There's
sooner.
no water, there's none of that stuff
Yeah.
there either, so
Yeah.
you're gonna have to look at that. And then you're gonna have to look at, you're still gonna have a share ratio with the state. And if you haven't sold the property, then you only get to take a bigger percentage of the actual costs that you might have sunk to make it usable. So
My point is,
it's
if we have
complicated.
we right now have more real estate than we know what to do with. And if we have an opportunity to possibly raise money before we talk ourselves out of even thinking about it, we ought to at least be sure we know what it is and what the circumstances.
I
That's all.
sent
I'm
Joe
not.
Rogers and the Catalyst Committee a copy of that.
Yeah.
Chris will just book another couple of movies.
Yeah.
There was an interesting article in this week's Boston Business Journal about the future of biotech real estate in Massachusetts, and it was an interview with a guy from Los Angeles who specializes in biotech, and he was talking about the growth in the market, and I have to wonder if, when Corning came here, my understanding was that they wanted to be near a big city but not in it. And I have to wonder, I know most biotech companies want to be within a half mile of MIT or Mass General, but there may be an occasional company that would like to go further afield. In fact, this article, he talks about developments along 128 in the surrounding suburbs. Now, we're not on 128, but we're not that far. So I wonder if I was thinking the Lowell model, if you could find a company that was interested in locating with some housing on there for their employees, they might be interested in doing some sort of research facility or, and if that's something that wouldn't be good to look at, but.
That was one of the studies that was done on one of the consultants, I don't know if it was RKG or one of the others. And the issue there, of course, was that most of the models that they looked at for these, they want to be closer to a bigger city because the people that are moving there, I mean, they're, the people you're hiring are close to the generationals now, and they want a little more action. They don't want,
Right, but in
suburban area.
But in 5 or 10 years, they'll have kids and they'll want to put them in a good school system, and, it changes over time, so.
You just have this place over here with the avenue, that was leased out by one person, second and third floor. I wouldn't kiss it off. I mean, there are people out there looking for space,
Yes, yeah.
you know? So he's gotta get at least 5 + 5 or time-wise, 5 + 10 maybe.
I thought mass development would help you find those type of potential.
Yeah. It was interesting in this article, it said there are 10,000 diseases and they're only working on 500. So they're only covering like 5% of the potential market for drugs or cures for.
You're covering the 5% that actually have good revenue potential.
Right.
Yes, right,
There's
yes.
Lots
yeah.
of orphan
Lots of
drug.
people get
Yeah,
sick.
Yes,
there's
yeah.
lots of ways to get sick, but only certain ways to get sick and buy medicine that's worth
Yeah.
the cost of developing.
Well, yeah, you're right, but you never know what's cropping up. Look at Lyme disease. 20 years ago, who would have thought Lyme disease would be the problem it is today? And there's probably other ones like that. So hepatitis C now has become a big moneymaker, so you never know.
Okay.
The
Anything else for
The
our
next,
meeting,
the
or
next
are we-
lease, yeah, just
we done?
curious about the next lease down, which was that Hexagon, or Hexagon Energy. I immediately thought of the Cap landfill.
I'm sorry, what were you
The
saying?
solar,
The company looking for solar?
Solar field, solar
Oh,
panel
yeah,
field
where,
up-
where was that?
Oh,
I
yeah.
couldn't read the, where they were looking.
Hinckley and Plain Street.
Yes, the Hinckley property and a piece of the Holmquist property down off Plain Street.
Hmm.
I don't know why, but whenever you guys scan stuff, you can't read it.
Here.
Oh, I don't know.
Whatever,
Is there,
Yes,
is the.
the plans come through illegible.
Is the.
Well, they were pretty dark.
Is that available for?
It was pretty dark. That was, I lightened
Not
it
been
up.
finally capped is the problem.
Right. I understand they are starting to loosen up a bit on their regs
Mhm.
for landfills, but I don't think they're quite there yet, but I think maybe in a few years it might be.
That seems like an ideal location.
It
for
does,
solar
yes.
panels.
Well, there's only one problem with it. There are no places to feed it in the immediate vicinity. There is no electricity that runs up North Meadows Road. Everything is fed
You need
from
to have
other roads
proximity to the grid to take the electricity.
to feed
But
it
you
into, yeah.
can't tie in over it, on West Street?
You gotta get to West.
Just on the backside of the Legion?
And I don't know what does run on West, I'm not sure.
I mean, there's power to
I
the
just-
Legion, there's power to.
I don't even know if West Street is, from, say, North Meadows Road to the Millis line, is that underground or overhead? Funny, you drive there all the time and I'm not sure.
It can't be underground. Nobody puts stuff underground. It's too expensive.
I don't know.
Well,
West.
anyway, so it's not available
Yeah.
for that. Okay.
Not yet, but we did, by the way, get our second SREC check in today. It was $14,000, Evelyn.
Yep.
And that's, so we got 12,000 a couple of weeks ago. This is 14,000. And by my reckoning, we're entitled to 3 more for the wastewater treatment plant. So it's probably going to be somewhere around $60,000 for a year. And that will go down over time, but at the end of 10 years will expire, but by then the bonds will be paid off. Plus, I believe we should be saving about 40% on our electricity bill, so that really is paid off. And I think the way we did it was the right way, by owning it. Most of these, they get far less money because basically they're leasing the land, and the towns don't own the system. Most of them do it the power purchase agreement. So,
Anything else for this august group?
I move
Hearing
adjournment.
nothing, we'll be adjourned then. Great.